submission from Felix Cheng, who's joining us online. Felix in?
Yep, he's just coming. Dan just needs to turn his mic.
Okay, Felix, you need to unmute and turn your video on.
Yep. Hello?
Hi, Felix. Can you please turn your video on for the committee just so we can see who we're talking to? Good on you. Hey, thank you for being with the committee this afternoon. We've got you for a brief 5-minute session, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Yes, of course. I would like to begin by thanking the committee members for allowing me this opportunity to speak here. I will be presenting this in a written form. I will be reading this to you guys. Today I want to discuss the treaty's principle bill because I believe it's crucial for protecting equality. The principle under threat from postmodern ideas of equity and identity-based rights. Equality means treating everyone the same under the law, and is what holds our society together. But lately, I've noticed ideas pushing for equity, where different groups get different treatment based on identity, like co-governance. This could divide us, and I believe this bill aims to safeguard equality. And so I urge you to consider its importance. Let us begin with the obvious. Division is the enemy of unity. The very notion that Māori and non-Māori should have different access to different resources or different rights sows the seeds of fracture. It creates hierarchy where none need to exist. When we allocate privileges or burdens based on identity rather than merit or need, we erode the shared foundation that allows a society to function. Equal rights do not diminish anyone, they elevate everyone. To suggest otherwise is to perpetuate a myth that some must justifiably lose for others to gain, a zero-sum game that history has proven leads to only resentment and ruin. Consider the tragedies that litter our past, each a stark warning of where division by identity can lead. The Rwandan genocide of 1994 saw Hutus and Tutsis, neighbors turned enemies, driven apart by manufactured us versus them, a narrative that ended in a slaughter of nearly 1 million souls. The Jim Crow laws in the United States entrenched racial segregation, dehumanizing millions under the guise of separate but equal, a lie exposed by its own brutality. The Soviet Revolution in Mao's China too leaned on the same divisive mentality, branding entire classes, the bourgeoisie, as oppressors to be purged. In each case, the result was not justice, but catastrophe. These were not mere policy failures, they were the inevitable outcomes of systems that reject equality in favor of engineered justice. This us versus them mentality has deeper roots, one we must recognize if we are to avoid repeating history's mistakes. It finds its intellectual birthplace in Marxism, which framed the world as perpetual struggle between oppressors and oppressed. From this seed grew a finite categorization, landlords versus tenants, capitalists versus workers, and so on, each division a justification for conflict. Today, we see echoes of this in postmodern thinking, where equality is cast aside for equity, a concept that sounds noble but often translates into unequal treatment under the guise of fairness. Equity in this distorted form demands we tilt the scales not to level them, but to favor one group over the other based on historical narratives or identity markers. It is social engineering masquerading as justice. Equality, by contrast, trusts the impartiality of a system that applies the same rules to all. It does not presume to know who deserves more or less based on their ancestry or their story. It simply provides the framework for individuals to rise or fall by their own efforts. Equity, as it is often wielded today, risks reviving the very division we claim to abhor, pitting Māori against non-Māori. In a contest of who is owed what, this is not progress, it's a regression to the tribalism that we all struggle to overcome. So let me conclude with an analogy. While it might sound rather cryptic, I believe it proves its point. Imagine two gym goers, sweat-soaked and pondering the marvels of modern fitness. One turns to the other and says, "Look at all this equipment, so many contraptions for the same job. Why do we need 5 kinds of chest press machines?" His friend chuckles and replies, "Isn't it glorious? All these ideas bouncing around, inventors tinkering away, building things we didn't even know we needed. One day, some clever researcher finds a better way to grow your pectoral muscle, and wouldn't you know it, we've got just the right machine for it, gathering dust in the corner. And that's the beauty of it. No one planned it, no central committee decreed it, it just happened. Now picture the alternative, a state-run gym, where a serious official in a gray suit decides there's only room for one chess press machine because why waste resources on excess? Efficiency, they would call it. Equity for all gym goers, perhaps. But when that new research comes along, there's no machine waiting in the wings, no quirky inventor to thank. The system, rigid and controlled, stifles the spark of possibility. The gym goers shrug and make do, the potential quietly capped. This is the choice before us. Two systems, one that trusts in the organic chaos of equality, where solutions emerge from the ingenuity of individuals, and another that clings to control, carving up rights and resources like slices of finite pie. The Treaty Principles Bill offers us the former, a chance to embrace a singular standard that unites rather than divides, to choose otherwise. To enshrine separate systems is to invite the creeping malaise of us versus them, a specter that history has shown us ends in empty supermarkets, broken societies, and silenced voices. Thank you. That would be all.
Thank you, Felix. Look, that's the time we have this afternoon now. So I just want to acknowledge your submission on behalf of the committee and thank you for taking the time to present to us orally.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, we don't have Aaron with us yet, so I'm going to invite Pita Tipene back to the table. So Pita, welcome back. You are presenting on behalf of Te Runanga o Ngati Hine this time. So we will just quickly reset the clock for you and then begin your 10 minutes. Kia ora.
Kia ora te hea mana tēnā koutou, o tahi noiho, tōku mihi, o te mihi atu ki ngā tupuna I tāmoko hiai, I ngā kawenata tapu, ara he whakaputanga o te tiriti o Waitangi, he tapu, he tapu, he tapu rawatu. Te Runanga o Ngati Hine opposes the Treaty Principles Bill in its entirety. I'm not simply reading from what members of the panel have already read in our submission, or I don't intend to plough up the same field that has been ploughed up by previous speakers who oppose the Treaty Principles Bill. Ngati Hine is not a people who have recently arrived in New Zealand. We have our long-held narratives about what actually happened and what our tupuna actually agreed to, and not trying to interpret, having recently started looking at the history books of some people and their interpretations of what happened. Nonetheless, I've been instructed to not descend into the divisive rhetoric that the Treaty Principles Bill seeks to drag us all into. Divisiveness is what this bill seeks, and the hysteria it promotes is what it pursues to fan the flames of a political agenda and seeking votes, not nation building at all. Instead, please indulge with me on somewhat of a history lesson, as I say, our Ngati Hine narratives. Our Ngati Hine ancestor who signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi in 1840, as he did He Whakaputanga 3 years earlier in 1835, was the Ariki, or Supreme Chief, Kawiti. It is really important to understand the psyche of Kawiti and others who signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi. He did also get his two sons to sign, Taura Kawiti, the eldest, and Maihi, the youngest. Kawiti was born around the time when Captain Cook first sailed into the Bay of Islands in 1769. So that'll tell you where Ngati Hine is. In his journals, Cook described the Māori of the Bay of Islands as the finest physical specimens he had seen anywhere in the world. And as we know, Cook had experienced many peoples around the globe. In the 1830s, rangatira such as Kawiti were described as being noble, dignified, and honourable by the likes of the missionary Reverend Henry Williams, although he was also described as a heathen, as he would not adhere to the faith. For those of us who are familiar with the tohu or marks of the rangatira on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, you will see that Kawiti is at the very top. Suffice to say, it was Hone Heke who first signed on February the 6th, 1840. I'll leave you to work out why that is so. Kawiti had a ceremonial taiaha or fighting staff known as Te Rangi Tūkupu that today sits in the museum at the Waitangi National Trust. Te Rangi Tūkupu means honour your word, which is why Kawiti held it as a ceremonial weapon. He also held Te Rangi Tūkupu in his hand when Honeheke visited him almost exactly 180 years ago to this day, in February 1845, bearing a greenstone mere smeared with human excrement. Kawiti immediately understood the symbolism of the mere placed before him by Honeheke, the precious greenstone being the mana inherited or authority and responsibility of the chiefs, while the human filth was the contamination of that mana by the imposition of British rule. That had reached a crescendo only 5 years after the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. The reply by Kawiti to Honeheke was me poroa ngā ringaringa me ngā waiwai, effectively a declaration of war on the British. Kawiti also brandished Te Rangi Tūkupu in his hand on March the 11th, 1845, when he, amongst other chiefs, led the attack on the town of Kororareka, while Honeheke famously cut down the flagstaff on Maki Hill. The Battle of Kororareka ignited the wars of the North, culminating in the Battle of Ruapekapeka on January the 11th, 1846. Much blood was spilt in the name of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as Kawiti and others were willing to put their lives on the line for the honour of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Members of the Justice Select Committee, I have taken over 5 minutes of my allocated time to describe what type of human being Kawiti was, what he stood for, and therefore what Ngati Hine stands for in 2025. My aim is to help you and anyone listening that when I said at the start of my address, he tapu, he tapu, he tapu rawatu, that we of Ngati Hine hold our ancestors' agreement to having put their sacred mark on the parchment that we now know as Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as a highly honourable, a sacred agreement and a promise made by the leaders of two peoples. We resolutely hold to that today and will do into the future, no matter what. Described by Hobson on February the 6th, 1840 as He iwi tahi tātou, which I heard one of the previous speakers say, we are now one people. Translated, He iwi tahi tātou actually means together we are a nation. A nation was forged on February the 6th, 1840, an honourable agreement between what we now know as tangata whenua, people of the land, and tangata tiriti, people who are part of our nation by right of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. An honourable person is someone who believes in truth and doing the right thing, living and behaving to high principles. Honour, or being honourable, is what members of Parliament understand well, given that some are bestowed the title of honourable or even right honourable. The Treaty Principles Bill is being described as dead in the water, which may be so. But we as Aotearoa, New Zealand, are looking into the future now for the nationhood that was truly founded when it was first signed on February the 6th, 1840, and not on the fanciful ambitions of ideologues. It is 2025, and the bicentennial of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi is only 15 years away. Despite this bill tearing our nation apart and taking race relations backwards, we do need to keep building a nation founded upon the words and aspirations of our ancestors, both partners, and they were partners. Ngati Hine is determined to uphold the true intent of Te Tiriti, and as such, we are steadfast in our independence, but we are also resolute in our interdependence. We do need to be purposeful about building a nation and understanding the simplicity of what Te Tiriti o Waitangi is and will be as we move into the future. And we must be purposeful to take everyone with us, not having some people being exploited by fear and loathing because of political imperatives. Aotearoa, New Zealand is not the Britain of the South Pacific, but it will be a true melding of cultures. Yes, we are a democracy, but we must have our own version of democracy built upon the foundations of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and not following what may suit other nations around the world in terms of modern liberal societies. The end game must be a culture created by tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, which will be the culture of our future governing structures and processes. Te reo Māori and English will be spoken interchangeably and with pride, and our tikanga will be observed. The only place in the world where this can be found. That is the end game. Ngati Hine is very clear that the true treaty, the only treaty, was Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This is what Kawiti, the ariki of Ngati Hine, and his two sons, Taura and Mahi, signed, given that those were the words that were explained, understood, and signed. And the Treaty of Waitangi in English is irrelevant today, and so then are the treaty principles. I conclude this submission by saying that upon the conclusion of the Battle of Te Rua Peka Peka in January 1846, Kawiti uttered these words, well, several lines of what is a longer oration. Waiho kia kakati te namu I te wharangi o te puka puka, e konei ka tahuri atu ai. When the honour of Te Tiriti o Waitangi is being undermined, you must come together and stand strong. Those words are a call to action, and we of Ngati Hine hold tight to those principles. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Pita. Thank you for your submission. Nice to see you again. That's the time for this afternoon, but we acknowledge you and thank you for providing it to the committee. We're now going to go to Te Kawerau Maki Settlement Trust, and we've got joining us online Edward Ashby. Kia ora, Edward. Thank you for joining the committee this afternoon. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I will hand directly over to you to begin your presentation.
Rapai. Kia ora. Yes, kia ora. My name's Edward. I'm here obviously on behalf of Te Kawerau Maki. Our chair, Te Wārana Taua, couldn't make it, so he sent me in his place. I want to first thank you for your time today and also acknowledge your efforts in getting through such a large volume of submissions on this bill. You will have heard, obviously, from a great number of people with many perspectives and opinions. I'd like to acknowledge that while we appreciate the opportunity to be heard by this committee, this 10-minute slot is the first time Te Kawerau Maki have been given to officially engage with this bill, despite being a signatory to Te Tiriti and despite this bill significantly impacting our specific iwi rights. Today, I would like to briefly comment on 3 areas covered in our submission in more detail. So just high-level summary. So that's the 3 issues of tikanga, the treaty, and our treaty settlement. So to start with tikanga, this is the original law of the land. It's derived from whakapapa and from the mana of hapu and iwi, and not from the Crown. It cannot be altered nor extinguished by the Crown. The treaty acknowledged tikanga, including rangatiratanga, as part of and acknowledging and protecting the enduring rights of hapu and iwi. The establishment of the government and Westminster system of laws did not mean an end of tikanga, though the arrangement of how the two would interact is a basic point of the treaty. As found by the courts, tikanga is part of the legal framework of this great nation. This bill steps beyond, in my opinion, the jurisdiction of the Crown and attempts to limit and codify tikanga to only those matters explicitly expressed within a treaty settlement for historic breaches, which were not designed for codifying the culture, customs, or tikanga of an iwi, but rather for the Crown to provide redress for breach of contract historically. The second point, just to summarise, is the treaty itself. So obviously, it's an agreement or a contract between 2 parties, broadly hapu, iwi, and the Crown. It set out how a new civil government could be set up to manage manahiri, present and coming to these lands, and how hapu and iwi could continue to govern our own collective affairs, and how we'd all work together for the benefit of both sides and thus all peoples. It is the enduring constitutional arrangement and foundation of the legitimacy of this nation. Both parties are bound to it and to each other. This bill, while explicitly claiming that it does not alter the text of the treaty or treaty settlements, does legally codify, or would, if passed, legally codify how anyone can read and apply these. This workaround is, in my opinion, intellectually dishonest and constitutionally bankrupt. There are several fundamental issues here. The first is that the bill does not accurately reflect the treaty and is in fact inconsistent with it. The bill breaches the treaty through the Crown taking a unilateral decision without our involvement. It ignores jurisprudence, case law, and established knowledge regarding the principles that arise from the treaty. Fourth, it purports to promote a national conversation about the place of the treaty. However, the only conversation we've witnessed is the Crown talking to itself and not to its treaty partners. We've not had nor been invited to have a single conversation about this bill or the role of the principles in the Constitution. The bill and the debate around it, in particular talk of a referendum, seem to place collective hapu iwi rights into a framework whereby the tyranny of the majority can and should override these rights, which in our view is an unconstitutional breach of the treaty. The last point is around our treaty settlement. So we entered into a settlement with the Crown in 2014. The settlement included a historical account, as they all do, of our people and the many breaches of the treaty by the Crown, resulting in our iwi being left landless and without a marae. This is still the case today. The Crown acknowledged that we had honoured our side of the deal since 1840, but that the Crown breached the treaty and its principles when it failed to consider, consult, proactively protect and compensate Kawerau rights and interests in various matters, including land transactions, and relevant to this, the introduction of laws that impacted us without our direct participation. This undermined our social and economic development, our well-being, and undermined our ability to manage our taonga and wahi tapu. In my view, the most important part of a treaty settlement is the promise that the Crown hopes to form a new relationship with Te Kawerau based on mutual trust, cooperation, and respect for the treaty and its principles. The bill has breached our treaty settlement already, in my view. It has done so through the process of its formulation, which took place totally without us and thus broke its renewed promise of cooperation. It has failed to proactively protect our rights by undertaking a national debate in a one-sided manner. It has been utterly without respect for us, the treaty, or its principles. It has broken our trust by embarking on this bill, and it's why don't provoke attacks on our rights and identity without any dialogue or good faith. By reinterpreting the treaty principles, the Crown has breached our settlement where it refers to treaty principles, which in context of the acknowledgement and apology, are clearly very different from the principles proposed in this bill. Our treaty settlement cannot be retroactively and unilaterally redefined, and this creates an inconsistency between our treaty settlement and the bill. In conclusion, for all of these reasons, we seek the bill be returned to the House and withdrawn. But not only that, that a formal apology be issued by the Crown for yet again undermining our rights and well-being, and that a process, most importantly, of reconciliation happened for the benefit of all people. So I thank you for your time and happy to take questions.
Kia ora, thank you. We've got time for questions. The first one is from Simon Court.
Kia ora.
Simon, you're on mute, mate.
Kia ora, Edward. Thank you for your
Kia ora.
submission. Just got a few questions around some of the terminology you use that might be helpful for the committee when we get to deliberation. You referred to tangata whenua and manahiri, and I'm wondering, in your understanding, does manahiri mean visitors or guests? And is that, were you referring to non-Māori people as visitors or guests? Did I get that right?
Kia ora, Minister. Yes, that's correct. So using it in a general term to be to mean people that are not only, or not necessarily only not Māori, but that are guests or visitors to Aotearoa, Te Kawerau Maki specifically, which is, West Auckland. So Obviously, the term is an evolving term because people set down their own roots in our country and in our territories, but that's the general use of that term.
So just to explore that a little bit further, so are you suggesting that, I mean, I live in West Auckland, maybe like you, or where Te Kawerau Maki has their rohi. Would you consider people whose families have been here over 200 years visitors or guests in this country, or are we citizens with equal rights to all other citizens?
I think people that are not Kawerau Maki that live in West Auckland are citizens of this country and valued residents of Aotearoa. In a tikanga sense, there's a manahiri part because of whakapapa to the underlying whenua in the sense of and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about under Te Ao Māori and tikanga. Yes, certainly citizens with equal rights.
Okay. Is there time for one further brief question,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair?
I'll
Actually,
take
no,
one
I'm
more.
sorry. I see Joseph has his hand up. So I'll thank you, Edward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I'll take the question from Joseph, then we'll wrap up the session.
Oh, kia ora, Edward. Yeah, just look further to that. I'm interested in your thoughts on the Waitangi Tribunal. It looked at the Rekohu and wrote a report on the Chatham Islands. They decided that Ngati Matunga had become tangata whenua because of burying their dead in the land and having places that become sacred to them and burying the placenta of their children and therefore becoming so. Through that process, they had become tangata whenua. I'm interested in your thoughts on the Waitangi Tribunal's view on that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Look, I'm not from there, so I can't speak to first-hand knowledge or experience of that. But I think the general gist of that finding is obviously that within New Zealand, tribes, people of Indigenous whakapapa have moved around and that have collectively established identities and roots to the ground. So I guess to extrapolate what I think that question is driving at, can non-Māori become tangata whenua? Look, I think I'm using the terminology of tangata whenua in the normal Indigenous context, and that's a whole other discussion that I think is beyond this particular bill.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Edward. That's the time for our session this afternoon. So just on behalf of the committee, can I acknowledge your submission and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Right, we're now going to move to a submission from the Department of Public Health, University of Otago, Wellington. And joining us is Associate Professor Bridget Robson, Dr. Amanda D'Souza and Belinda Tuari-Tolman. Kia ora koutou, thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand directly over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koe, tēnā tātou, tēnā koutou te committee. He kai kōrero tokotoru mātou. Ko tainui te waka, ko tararuanga pai maunga, ko o Aotearoa, ko no Ngati Raukawa, te au ki te tonga hau. Nō reira tēnā tātou. I work with the Te Ropi Rangahau Hauora Herearoha, the Herearoha Māori Health Research Centre, which is part of the Department of Public Health. We were established in 1992 by Professor Herearoha, who was the Dean of the Medical School at the time, to do research by and for Māori and to train Māori in a range of research methods. Herearoha, as many will know, was a significant Māori health leader. He was the mokopuna of Maui Pomare, who was the first Māori doctor and a Minister of Health later in his career. He passed prematurely in 1995 and we became named after him at that point. We were established in 92. His colleagues, his influence was very significant. He produced, he was on the board of health with his colleagues Herearoha Ramsden, who established cultural safety, Herearoha Murchie, who led the first Māori health, women's health survey, Rapuora, and he and his colleague Gail Deborah established a series of statistics on Māori and non-Māori inequities in health, which we have carried on. he left us that legacy of examining health disparities and the causes of them. And he passed in the 1990s, which is a decade that has become known as the decade of disparity, as in the 1980s, the neoliberal policies of the Labour government of the time, followed on by the National in the 90s, had a significantly disproportionate impact on the social determinants of health, especially for Māori. Māori life expectancy until that time was increasing at a rate that was going to catch up with that of non-Māori, but it's these policies which disproportionately made Māori unemployed, affected education, income, housing, significantly more for Māori, and such that Māori became known as the shock absorbers of the economy. And life expectancy for Māori actually stalled, which is really incredible, and the gap in life expectancy widened to 10 years. So we had a decade of life expectancy difference over 2 decades, the 80s and 90s. And only in recent years has that started to decrease again and is now 7-point-something years. And this bill, I believe, is taking us back to that time. We do have a new environment where there's a lot more rangatiratanga being established. But if that's taken away, then we're back there. So kia ora, and I'm going to hand over to Amanda.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, no pere tēnei o kutupuna, he tangata tereri o, ko Amanda D'Souza toko ingoa. Kia ora, I'm a public health physician based at Otago University, Wellington, in the Department of Public Health. We're a large department. We have over 100 people working there, and we're unanimously opposed to this harmful bill. Population health is really important. Our department focuses on understanding the upstream determinants of health at a population or a group level. These are the factors that lie beyond the individual. And we are particularly interested in the causes of systemic differences between population groups. These are called health inequities because they're unjust and they are avoidable. They're caused by how we as a nation distribute our resources, power, and opportunities. Our department has documented extensively the disparities that exist because the promises of Te Tiriti have not been upheld. And we have really clear evidence in the health sector, in the education, justice, welfare systems, and so on, that systemic inequities are still present. So in our submission, we state that Te Tiriti is the foundation for good health as a nation. Undermining the treaty is not good for the health of our people and for the well-being of our nation. Our submission states really clearly that we are opposed to the bill. The legal and constitutional arguments have been well documented for why this bill should be immediately withdrawn. And I'd like to draw your attention to our recommendation 3 of beginning a process of repair and redress for the harm that's already been caused. We've done a submission, some summer research, one of our students has been out at a very small rural kura kaupapa Māori school and engaged with children between the ages of 8 to 12 to find out what Aotearoa is like for children at the moment and how we could make it better. And the findings showed very strongly that they thought that Aotearoa was a good place for children because of their connection to culture, whānau, the environment, to their tupuna, the awa, the moanga. But they were actually quite fearful about what this bill had done. 8-year-olds were talking about toitu Te Tiriti, and our researcher found that they were quite fearful on what it would mean for their kura and their place in our society. I'm going to hand over to our community research partner based at Kāwerau Marae. Over to you, Belinda.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi ngā mema o tēnei komiti. Kia ora, i te haukainga o te whenua nei, tēnā koutou, koutou mā, kia ora. Ko taku mokopuna o te whānau rua taupari, te hāpū ki roto i te iwi Ngati Parau. He kaimahi, he kaiarahi o te Kōkiri Marae, Kiriana Olsen, Tūkotahi Māori Asthma Trust, ko Belinda Tuari Tūmarahau. Te tiriti to us means honouring our partnership, our word, kia mau te reo, me ona tikanga a tātou tūpuna. We acknowledge our partners, Te Rohu Rangahau Haura o Eru and Department of Public Health, University of Otago, Wellington, our hapu, our iwi, our whānau. All your efforts have paved the evidence way for many Māori Haura community providers to continue to resource our whānau needs. This legacy we see through our whakapapa, Kōkiri Marae, Kiriana Olsen Trust, which has been servicing Te Awa Kairangi Lauaha for over 45 years now. It is the foundation of our whānau ora collective, Tākiri Mai Tiata, that is a consortium of 11 providers, Kōkiri Marae, Kiriana Olsen at the centre, Kōkiri Marae Māori Women's Refuge, Manawahine, Ngāku Inei Tamariki, Tūkotahi Māori Asthma Trust, Wainui no Mātu Marae, Whaiora Community Health Hub, He Puawai, Whaiora Whānui ki Wairarapa, and Te Hauora Runanga o Wairarapa. What has been pivotal in growing our services was the research mahi that Otago and Tāurupu Marae conducted, which established Tūkotahi Māori Asthma Trust as the first asthma society in Aotearoa. It's because of the findings from He Mate Huangoa Māori Asthma Review that Tāurupu Marae undertook in the early 90s that addressed the appalling rates of Māori who were dying or being hospitalised with asthma. This review outlined the huge inequities that were occurring between Māori and non-Māori with asthma when accessing appropriate care and treatment. One of the key recommendations from the report was for a by Māori, for Māori service to be established in the rural urban communities. It was through those findings and collaborative partnership that highlighted how important it was to undertake research that identified the inequalities in Māori health because it provided evidence-based insights into the poor health disparities that continue today. This information has been essential for informing policy decisions, guiding resource allocation, developing targeted interventions such as our Well Home Service, and in the past, our Wainui o Mātu Marae COVID-19 vaccination clinic. Research opportunities that our partnership fostered has meant tūkotahi services within Tākiri Marae to continue to restore respiratory outcomes for our tamariki and whānau. These are but some of our services examples, but this is not a submission to proclaim what we do. It is how and what will the government do next to ensure tamariki and whānau thrive and continue to partner with Māori communities as the obligations of Te Tiriti provide. We refuse to be choked by this Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill's vote, that infectious hoax that some folks thought they could encroach on our history's nation's best folk, breaking our yoke, staining our cloaks with the colonial smoke, clogging our throats. No, this ain't no joke, but we stand proud amongst the crowds contesting this round, remembering the vow that the Crown laid down. Kia ora mai tātou.
Thanks, folks. That's all the time we have for submissions this afternoon. So I just want to, on behalf of the committee, acknowledge you for being here and for providing your submission.
Thank you.
We'll now go to submission from Daniel Newman. Daniel will be joining us online. Good, Daniel. Thank you for joining the committee. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I will hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Well, kia ora koutou katoa. I'm not sure if you can hear me. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, firstly, I don't support, look, my name's Daniel Newman. I'm an Auckland councillor representing the Manarewa Papakura ward in South Auckland. My constituency is home to a very large number of urban Māori, and we have been significantly affected by the ebb and flow of policy decisions taken in central government in recent years. I don't support the bill. I don't think that the bill should proceed. I believe that there are a number of reasons why Māori in particular feel particularly aggrieved by decisions set down by government, the state, the Crown. This isn't new. Māori have suffered land confiscation, which occurred really kicking off only a few years after the treaty was signed in 1840. But Parliament has at various times sought to intervene and in a way which has left Māori aggrieved. The 2004 foreshore and seabed legislation is a really defining moment for me in terms of an intervention whereby Parliament seeks to interpret how rights will be explored when the appropriate remedy at that time would have been to allow for Ngāti Apa to explore their customary rights through the processes of the courts. So there are a lot of concerns, and as I've highlighted in my submission, as recently as the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020 and 2021 have undermined public confidence in my community about the judgments that the Crown will set down and how it will affect the lives of people, including many people who are Māori who feel disenfranchised anyway. I go back to what I think is more fundamental, and that is the Treaty of Waitangi Act, which was passed 50 years ago this year. And I think that the late Mātiurata was onto something when he passed that legislation, because it provided a framework for Parliament to allow for the Waitangi Tribunal and the courts to consider this matter. And I think that's really important, because at its heart, Matt Rata understood that the treaty had both an English and a Māori version, and that the chiefs signed that document based on their understanding of the latter. And I think it's necessary to be mindful, therefore, of the original context for which that partnership was agreed. I think that the issue now for Parliament to simply seek to define its interpretation of those principles, to me, is not an act of good faith. But I believe that beyond this bill, there needs to be something that happens, and that is that it is clear that Parliament can change our constitutional framework fairly easily, a lot easier than in other countries, and therein lies a problem. I think that Parliament ought to elevate the Treaty of Waitangi Act to a proper constitutional status by entrenching it, to make it much harder for future parliaments to simply intervene through a simple majority to change the context for which the Waitangi Tribunal was constituted all those years ago. And I think that that would be something that would be much appreciated, because my concern is that just as we've had interventions previously which have caused great concern, anxiety. I mean, the 2004 debate, that really was the genesis of Te Pāti Māori. But, you know, there have been times in our history where Parliament has been quick to act, and really, I don't think it should have had the power to act in that way. There are very few statutes in this country that are entrenched, and most of those arrangements are set out in the Electoral Act, and the Constitution Act 1986 is the other one. But I think that, and I support our constitutional framework, but Te Tiriti does sit at the forefront of that, and the concern that Māori will have now is their interpretation of what Parliament is seeking to do. My concern beyond that is how easy it is to try and achieve that. But if there are 4 parties in the Parliament, 4 or 5 parties in the Parliament that are indicating that they don't support the bill in its current form, that's fine. The bill won't pass, but what happens next? And my view is what happens next ought to be a raising of the 1975 Act to recognise the importance of that statute and the context for what Mātiurata sought to do at that time to constitutional status by entrenching it. And I think that that would go some way to atoning for the sense of dismay that some people in our community have, as well as providing a greater level of guidance as to what we would consider would be an appropriate protection for the Waitangi Tribunal and the courts, which ultimately, in my view, are the better forum for defining what these principles are. So, Chair, my time is limited. I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Daniel. We've got time for questions. First one's from Simon Court. You're on mute there, Simon.
Oh, it's 2025. Still haven't got the hang of it. Kia ora, Daniel, and thank you for your submission. It's really interesting, and I just want to test a few ideas on you. You suggested elevating the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act, which first referred to principles to having a higher status and potentially being entrenched. Do you think that Parliament should be able to define the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, given that they're mentioned in that act but not defined?
No, I don't. I think that the appropriate place for that is through the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal. I think that Parliament should provide the framework for how these decisions can be made. And the point that I would make, and I hope that my submission was clear about this, is I think that a unicameral Parliament without a second chamber and without a set of rules as to how constitutional arrangements will be amended in the future means that Parliament has too much power. And so the margin for error really doesn't exist if you're leaving it up to people whose, I mean, it might sound elitist, but yes, people are elected to Parliament via the ballot box. But ultimately, I think that these matters are more nuanced than that, given the nature of the signing of the Te Tiriti in 1840 with the English and the Māori version. I think that I trust the processes of the court, and I trust the Waitangi Tribunal, so I'm comfortable with the current arrangement.
Well, if I could just follow up, Mr. Chair, because I mean, you've opened up a really interesting discussion. You've been very clear, Daniel, that you believe that Parliament should not legislate in this case, even though Parliament legislates principles in all kinds of other acts, whether it's the Crown Minerals Act or Land Transport Act. There's principles everywhere, but not in this case. You've been very clear that only the courts and an unelected tribunal, which actually doesn't have the standing of a court, it's a tribunal, it gives advice, should be able to articulate these principles. And yet the principles of lawmaking in New Zealand are that the law should be clear and clearly enforceable. That essentially is the rule of law. Anyone should be able to pick it up, read it, understand it, and apply it to their business or in their lives. So how on earth is what you're suggesting consistent with commonly understood approach to the rule of law?
Because the nature of the relationship between the parties that were signatories to the treaty in 1840 was based not only on the English but also the Māori document, and I think it's always been an area which is somewhat fraught, and that's the reason why Parliament didn't work to define the treaty principles in the first place. In any event, there are 3 articles in the treaty. I accept that Parliament will legislate for land transport, all manner of portfolios, but we're talking about the treaty, which is a constitutional relationship between 2 parties which are foundational in this country. And I don't think that it's up to Parliament actually in this term or the next or the next term after that to take a complex matter such as this and say, this is at this point in time our interpretation of this treaty, and we will now, as one party to that particular document, take it to a referenda. I think that that is unwise. I think it lacks social license. I think it's been divisive, and that's not what Parliament sought to do in 1975. I think this relationship has actually been working quite well in recent years, and I wouldn't want to change it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Simon, for the questions too. That's the time we have for this afternoon. So just want to acknowledge on behalf of the committee your presence and for taking the time to submit to us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Right, we're now going to move to submission from David Bullock. David is joining us online and is in the room now. Kia ora, David. Thank you for joining us. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I will hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I speak to you today as a Pākehā lawyer with expertise in constitutional and public law, having appeared in a number of significant cases concerning issues of tikanga Māori and principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. I oppose the bill. I'm grateful to the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak in this process and to participate. I will endeavour to keep my comments brief as you have my written submission and much has already been said. I want to begin my submission on the topic of the process to consider this bill and what it means to have a conversation about important issues like the Crown-Māori relationship. While I am grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you today, The relevant conversation is not one in which I or many others who have submitted on the bill should be involved. The relevant conversation, if there is to be any reconsideration of what was promised in the Treaty of Waitangi, is one that must occur between Māori and the Crown. The Treaty of Waitangi is an agreement between Māori and the Crown. It is the instrument upon which the ability of this Parliament to govern rests, as it is through the treaty that the Crown acquired Kāwanatanga. The Crown, in return, guaranteed to Māori tino rangatiratanga over what was theirs, in addition to the same rights and privileges as British subjects. This was the bargain that was struck. It was this act of constituent power between Māori and the Crown that forms the foundation of New Zealand's constitution. If that foundation is to be altered, then that is something that must be discussed and agreed between the Māori and the Crown as the parties to the bargain. This bill and this process seek to reconstitute the relationship between the Crown and Māori through an act of this Parliament and a popular referendum. That is inappropriate. The bill and its process involve the wrong discussion in the wrong place between the wrong people. If the bargain struck in the Treaty of Waitangi is to be resettled, then that must be done between the Māori and the Crown. The resettlement of that bargain cannot legitimately be forced upon Māori by a unilateral act of this Parliament or by a majority of voters in a popular referendum. As Sir Geoffrey Palmer has already said to this committee, policy and conversations about policy do not begin with the introduction of legislation. Additionally, it is inappropriate for the rights of Māori as a minority in New Zealand to be subjected to the will of the majority through a mechanism like a popular referendum. These are reasons alone for this process and this bill to proceed no further. I turn now to the bill itself. The proponents of this bill say that it is needed to give content to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi because existing legislation does not do so. However, when Parliament first developed the concept of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, it was attuned to the challenges posed by the inconsistencies in the text of the treaty. Parliament's decision to leave the content of the principles to be developed by the courts was deliberate. It was recognition that the foundations of our Constitution should sit outside the ordinary party political agendas that prevail in this House. It was recognition that the courts, as an apolitical institution with expertise in interpretation, were better placed than a political forum to give form and content to the principles of the treaty. Over the decades, the courts have developed a settled understanding of those principles. These judicially recognised principles are an imperfect, yet reasonably clear and functional embodiment of the terms and spirit of the treaty, having regard to its textual inconsistencies, its historical context, its purpose, and its spirit. Successive parliaments have demonstrated satisfaction with the interpretation of the courts by continuing to include treaty principles clauses in almost all significant legislation. In some ways, this is unsurprising, as the current judicially recognised principles are more favourable to the Crown than the terms of the treaty itself. In short, this bill purports to solve a problem that does not exist because the judicially recognised principles of the treaty are already well known, well settled, and well accepted parts of New Zealand's law and constitution. I turn now to the new principles sought to be created in the bill. The bill does not seek to simply legislate the existing judicially recognised principles of the treaty, but to create new principles that do not reflect the treaty at all. Principle 1 of the bill is unnecessary. The Constitution of New Zealand already recognises the power of Parliament to make laws and the power of the government to govern. Our Constitution is already founded upon the rule of law and the maintenance of a free and democratic society. Principle 2 of the bill is an effort in doublespeak. It purports to recognise, respect and protect the rights of Māori under the treaty, but not where those rights differ from the rights of everyone else. This is doublespeak because all of the rights guaranteed to Māori in Article 2 of the treaty differ from the rights of everyone else. Those rights of tino rangatiratanga were guaranteed to Māori only. They were possessed by Māori only. As such, Principle 2 of the bill is an oxymoron. While it purports to recognise, respect and protect the rights of Māori under the treaty, its effect is to disrespect, dishonour and deny those same rights. Far from embodying the text or spirit of Article 2 of the treaty, in fact, the bill reconstitutes Article 2 to be the opposite of what it says. Principle 2 of the bill suggests that differential rights will, however, be respected where they are agreed in the settlement of an historical treaty claim. However, Māori and the Crown already reached an agreement on their respective rights by signing the Treaty of Waitangi. Treaty settlements respond to the Crown's many and varied breaches of that agreement and occur in circumstances where the Crown exercises disproportionate bargaining power and with little judicial or legal oversight. There can be no legitimate reason for recognising Māori rights agreed with the Crown in treaty settlements while denying Māori the rights agreed with the Crown in the treaty itself. It is Principle 2 of the bill that squarely discloses that its intention is not to embody what was agreed in the Treaty of Waitangi, but to dishonour that agreement and to unilaterally restrike that bargain because the proponents of the bill appear to be unhappy with what was agreed in 1840. Principle 3 provides that everyone is equal before the law. That is already a core feature of the rule of law and of New Zealand's constitution. For Māori, formal equality with non-Māori was already promised and recognised in Article 3 of the Treaty of Waitangi by extending to Māori the same rights and privileges as British subjects. However, this was in addition to the guarantees of tēnā rangatira made to Māori and to Māori only in Article 2 of the treaty. It is important to understand that equality before the law does not mean that everyone's rights are the same. Rather, it means that everyone's rights are protected in the same way under the same law. That is already true in New Zealand, and it is not at all inconsistent with recognising and protecting the rights of Māori that were guaranteed in Article 2 of the treaty. In closing, this bill does not seek a conversation. It seeks to force a political narrative in the hope that a majority of New Zealanders will agree to impose a new and disadvantageous constitutional settlement upon Māori, all premised upon a dangerous fiction that Māori are somehow unfairly advantaged at the expense of an oppressed majority. It is a sad, disingenuous and divisive bill. I implore this Parliament to reject it, and I hope that we can move quickly to heal the wounds that it has caused and to grow together towards a brighter future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Members, there's probably time for questions if there are any around the room. We'll take a question from Jenny Anderson.
Thank you very much for your submission. Do you have any advice or views for those who take the view that law generated by the courts or the decision from judges is somehow not New Zealand law or somehow at a different standard to that made by Parliament?
Yes, that would be quite a wrong view. New Zealand law has many sources, including the legislation passed by this House and also both the common law created by the courts, but also the judicial interpretations of Parliament's legislation by the courts. Those are authoritative and they perform a core part of our constitutionally separated powers. Parliament passes the law, the courts interpret them. The judicial interpretation of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, of that concept, was precisely what was intended by Parliament and is an ordinary function of the courts, which is of equivalent authority to legislation passed by this House.
And just around it not being democratic, specifically to that point, the view that politicians are elected and make law and judges are not elected. Do you have a view that one form of lawmaking is more democratic than the other?
No, all forms of the Constitution, all forms of the parts of the Constitution that make law are equally important and legitimate. Legislation is made by this House for elected representatives, but we have apolitical courts precisely because some matters need to transcend party politics, including the interpretation of legislation, and that's what's occurred here.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Jenny. That's the time for our session this afternoon. So just on behalf of the committee, thank you for being with us and for providing your oral presentation.
Thank you all.
Okay, we're going to now go to a submission from Henrik Moller. Henrik's in person with us today. So Henrik, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your patience throughout the afternoon. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll invite you to begin your presentation now.
Ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Warm greetings to you all. My personal gratitude for having this opportunity to speak is partly intensely personal. I was born in Denmark. Our family immigrated to Aotearoa in 1955, and I became a New Zealand citizen in my early teens. I'm proud to identify as Pākehā and a member of Tangata Treaty. More importantly for me, Te Treaty provides a birthright for my wife and my 3 wonderful children and 2 mokopuna. It underpins their place and my place to stand, if you like, our tūranga waiwai. With any rights comes responsibilities, and for me, honouring the Te Treaty o Waitangi secures my warrant to live, learn, work and raise a family here over the past 70 years. Honouring Te Treaty is therefore fundamental to my identity, my sense of well-being and my sense of belonging. Enactment of this bill would abrogate this responsibility. With rights come responsibilities. For me, honouring Te Treaty o Waitangi secures my warrant. Beg your pardon. So enactment of this bill would abrogate this responsibility to honour Te Treaty o Waitangi for the reasons I've put above, and especially by nullifying the manifestations of Article 2 of the treaty. I'd now like to take a few moments to emphasise just 2 themes of a less personal and more professional nature, emerging from my 25 years of ecological and social research with Māori communities on issues of sustainability and environmental care. I trained as an ecologist for decades and sought understanding for more efficient harvest management, pest control, species recovery and mitigation of ecological disturbance. I thought, like most scientists, that the main opportunities and challenges for securing environmental health would be found in wise management of biophysical processes. 20 years of work with Mātauranga and Kaitiakitanga of the mutton bird harvesters of Raki-Rotiti Islands taught me that I was mainly looking in the wrong direction. The key to healing and caring for the environment starts by caring for people, by strengthening connections and respect between ourselves and our loved places, plants and animals. At the heart of sustainability is a social contract that we will not do anything to our shared environment that undermines the opportunities and well-beings of others, those already here and those yet to be born. That social contract demands respect, humility, honouring each other's knowledge and values, and listening and working together. Only once we genuinely connect to each other can long-term planning and action for environmental care emerge. We often say, ko ora te whenua, ko ora te tangata. If the land is healthy, the people will be healthy. Less often we give effect to the other part of this fundamental and sacred reciprocity. Kia ora te tangata, kia ora te whenua. If the people are healthy, then the land will be healthy. The importance of a cultural precautionary principle to stand alongside an environmental precautionary emerged from our Kia Mau Te Titi Maki research contract with Russel Māori, an 18-year partnership. This treaty principles, were it to be enacted, will violate such a cultural precautionary principle, and Aotearoa's environment and well-being will suffer. A second emerging theme from my research was the value of the Treaty of Waitangi principles to lay the foundation for a sound and rewarding research partnership between Māori communities and science teams. This included partnership between Mātauranga Māori and science. I started down this track because an external audit in 1993 identified that my teaching and research at the University of Otago lacked a treaty response. The reviewer said that I had set up an excellent postgraduate teaching program for white, middle-class, forest and bird members, but that my university's duty as a critic and conscience of society required inclusion of te ao Māori. It was a fair cop. The importance, what ensued over the following 20 years was one of the hardest and most rewarding teaching and research programs of my career. It wasn't fun, there were bumps along the road, but it was very definitely the best thing I've ever tried to do. The importance of the existing Treaty of Waitangi principles for capturing collective benefits and avoiding some of the pitfalls of stalled partnerships emerged as a fundamental lesson from the get-go. Discussion of the principles was particularly important for starting a relationship between the scientists and mana whenua, and then a cultural safety contract about how we would act to each other that guided the next decade and a half. Everyone and the environment benefited. If this bill is enacted, our learning from each other across precious but very different knowledge systems is much less likely to occur. This Treaty of Principles Bill purports to create greater legitimacy and social cohesion. By attempting to submerge our differences and distort our history, it will in fact undermine us rather than bring us closer together. I end by highlighting paragraph 38 of the Regulatory Impact Statement. I urge the Select Committee to recommend an urgent search for better, more inclusive and more respectful ways to promote a deeper conversation about the place of the treaty in our legislation, policy and lifeways. This will require innovation and the creation of new panels and fora for ongoing dialogue. New institutions and processes may also go a long way to restoring trust and repair some of the damage to our social capital inflicted by this Treaty Principles Bill, which has reduced the mana of the Crown and the mana of tangata treaty that it serves. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Henrik. Thank you for your submission. Members, we've got some time for questions. Does anyone have any questions for Henrik based on that submission? Paul.
Yeah, kia ora, Henrik. Thank you for coming in and speaking to us today. I guess I wanted to draw out a bit of what you just said at the end there about how this whole thing has been disgraceful for tangata tiriti. Could you talk a little bit more about that and I guess how it's making you feel, what you're hearing, and yeah, just expand on that a little bit more?
Well, I think Māori need to be the ones talking about how it feels, and that has happened a lot in the hearings so far. For me personally, it's a mixture of deep sadness and some anger and some confusion, and a considerable amount of confusion, because it stands against the lessons I've learned over those 20 years of working and the benefits that have come for the environment and for the scores of students that have come through and worked in genuine partnership with Rakiura Māori. So that's from my point of view what it means.
Just to follow up on that, is it also partly that you've got the author of this bill purporting to represent all New Zealanders, and that's just not reflected in terms of what is being said around Pākehā New Zealanders and others?
Yes, that's where the anger comes from. The census shows that almost 30% of people living in New Zealand weren't born here, and that proportion is steadily increasing over the recent years. These people, having an honourable treaty and securing their birthright is a really important part and will become increasingly important. This bill undermines that.
Thank you.
Good, thanks, Tamitha. Thanks, Henrik. That looks like all the questions. So just on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you for being with us this afternoon, and again for being with us for a couple of hours today. It's been good to have you in the room watching the submissions as well.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to move now to a submission from the National Council of Women of New Zealand. So I'll invite, I think we've got Beryl Anderson, Suzanne Manning and Alicia. I can't read my own writing, sorry. I'm all here. So welcome to the table. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Just before we get started, I just want to I need to go back and address the point of order that was raised earlier on in the meeting. It's just around members' questions and comments that are reflecting on other members of Parliament. If we can just refrain from making personal reflections of members and implying what members may or may not have said or what their intentions are, if we can stick to the policy and the bill, that would be very helpful. So thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon. I will...
Can I just ask a question on that?
I'll talk to you in a second about we can go to the submission. It wasn't on me.
Oh.
Thank you for being with us. We have you for 10 minutes, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Suzanne Manning tōku ingoa. I am Pākehā, my pronouns are she, her. I am the president of Te Kaunihiri Wahine o Aotearoa, the National Council of Women of New Zealand.
Kia ora, ko Alicia Amohe tōku ingoa, ko Te Ati Haunui a Pāparangi, a rātou ko Ngati Maru, ko Ngati Haua ngā iwi, no Taumaranui, me Kamapotia, me Inia o. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the president of the local NCW branch here in Te Whanganui Atara, Wellington.
NCW fiercely opposes the coalition government's proposed principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. The NCW grew out of the suffrage movement with the goal of equal political participation for women and therefore greater democracy, improved democracy, democracy that would work. Our members have continued to have a keen interest in participation and democracy to this day, which is why they are so concerned about this bill. NCW recognises Te Tiriti o Waitangi as being a foundational contract for establishing Aotearoa as we know it today. It has constitutional level status and therefore cannot and should not be changed through an ordinary legislative process with ordinary consultation processes. Indeed, as we've seen, the public have turned this ordinary select committee process into something quite extraordinary. Changing the interpretation of Te Tiriti of itself through ordinary legislation is unconstitutional, illegal, and in breach of Te Tiriti, as well as in breach of several UN treaties, such as the Convention on Racial Discrimination and the Rights of Indigenous People. NCW supports the Human Rights Commission position that this bill breaches human rights when they said this bill specifically takes away the rights of only one group of New Zealanders, which is not in line with human rights standards. The bill therefore breaches the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination by removing Māori rights without any discussion directly with them. It also breaches the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Indigenous rights cannot be erased or modified by legislation. For tangata whenua, there are rights that come from whakapapa, from our connection to the whenua. The right to exercise tino rangatiratanga or self-determination is just one of those rights. It's also described in Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, affirming the continuing exercise of tino rangatiratanga by Māori. Principle 2, as proposed in this bill, attempts to inappropriately extend tino rangatiratanga to all New Zealanders, and there is no treaty or contract or law that could bestow a right that is gained through whakapapa. The bill misrepresents the foundational concepts of Te Tiriti and distorts the original guarantees made to Māori, which will reduce Te Tiriti protections to Māori and taonga and add to structural discrimination. NCW believes the bill's proposed Principle 2 also jeopardizes this country's national and international commitments to safeguarding our natural environment. Statutory protections for our natural environment include treaty settlement claims, which are not only for the interests of Māori, but are benefits enjoyed by all. The bill presents a profound risk to the future prosperity of our landscape and to previously won campaigns to protect it, which have been largely led by Indigenous communities.
NCW takes an inclusive, intersectional feminist approach to our work. We recognise that ignoring cultural differences between women does not result in equality for all. This is obvious, for example, in the way that health outcomes for wahine Māori are worse on virtually every health indicator compared to Pākehā women. This has been shown by research over many years to be a result of structural discrimination caused in part by breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi over more than a century. And research has also shown quite clearly that the best outcomes for Māori come from kaupapa Māori health services. That is, treating Māori as Māori and not trying to provide a one Pākehā size fits all approach. And this intersectional approach was recognised recently by the Committee for the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is the CEDAW Committee. Recommendations from their concluding observations on the reporting period last October show their strong awareness of the intersectional nature of discrimination faced by wahine Māori.
The implementation of this bill would undermine social cohesion. NCW would like to discuss the gender aspect of this issue. It is disingenuous that the bill's proposed Principle 3 would claim everyone is equal before the law and should receive equal protection of the law, without acknowledging the existing inequities for Māori, in particular for Wahine Māori, around pay equity, economic independence, education opportunities, and safety and health outcomes, just to name a few, and without a mechanism to hold the government to account on already failing to satisfy this principle. Wahine Māori are often the paumanua, or the centre poles of most families. Simply put, to undermine Wahine Māori is to undermine the whānau, and social cohesion suffers. Without care and attention to the discrimination that Wahine Māori uniquely face, these challenges will be exacerbated. In pre-colonial Māori society, gender relations were more balanced. Wahine Māori were more respected and had greater leadership opportunities than in today's colonial society, where gender equality is far from being achieved. It is of great concern to NCW that the opinion of a minor political party has the potential to further discriminate against all Wahine Māori, overriding their collective wishes and wisdom.
So in conclusion, Te Tiriti o Waitangi principles developed over the past 50 years by Waitangi Tribunal reports, 40 years of case law have brought hope and direction for all New Zealanders. This bill, if implemented, would result in significant harm towards Māori and degrade the respect and honour of critical cultural diversity in this country. We are concerned that under the Treaty Principles Bill, current initiatives to plan, prioritise and deliver culturally appropriate services to Wahine Māori will be undermined or discontinued. Social, political, economic and health inequities for Wahine Māori would increase. This cannot be allowed to happen. This bill threatens to perpetuate the injustices of the past and widen the gap of inequity that persists in our communities. And from our point of view, this is particularly so for Wahine Māori and other women. From the decisions of the Waitangi Tribunal, based on wide consultation with Māori, from the decades of academic consideration and judicial analysis that have had input from Māori, National Council of Women firmly believes that the public is comfortable with the existing interpretation of the treaty principles. The members of the National Council of Women of New Zealand are especially so. We request that the Select Committee recommend for this unconstitutional, illegal and fundamentally flawed bill to be rejected in its entirety. Kia ora.
Thank you. We've got time for one question. We'll take it from Dr. Deborah Russel.
Oh, thank you, Chair. You mentioned that the public of New Zealand had seized on this bill and the opportunity and turned the whole process into something quite different, I think was your words, or something like that. Can you just elaborate a little on that?
300,000 submissions crashing a website is not usual practice for a select committee. That is extraordinary. So my words were, it's turned an ordinary select committee process into something extraordinary. So the National Council of Women regularly submit on a wide range of legislation. Usually we don't have any problem getting an oral submission. This time we were honoured to be one of the few who were selected and invited to be. That is not ordinary for this. The public have talked about this in much greater depth and quantity than usual.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. That's the time for the session this afternoon. So I just want to acknowledge on behalf of the committee, you both being with us and for providing your presentation. It's greatly appreciated.
Kia ora.
We're going to invite the Professional Historians Association of New Zealand, Aotearoa, to now join us. And I think we have Paul, husbands, Matthew Woodbury and Elizabeth, now Paoa or Boya? Paoa, third one. To the table. Thank you all for being with us. We've got 10 minutes with you this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
E ngā mema o te komiti, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Paul Husbands tōku ingoa. My name is Paul Husbands, and beside me are Elizabeth Bowyer and Matthew Deborah. Together we are appearing on behalf of the Professional Historians Association of New Zealand, Aotearoa. I will allow my colleagues to introduce themselves, but I am a professional historian who for the last decade and a half has been mainly working in Treaty of Waitangi related research and writing.
Tēnā koutou katoa, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Bowyer. I'm a historian and the treasurer of the Professional Historians Association of New Zealand, Aotearoa, known as FANZA. FANZA is an organisation comprised of trained historians who either have a research-based postgraduate tertiary degree in history or a related discipline, or a proven publication and research background. FANZA was formed in 1994 and currently has 180 members across the country. Our members work in a range of fields in the historical sector, including at the Waitangi Tribunal, in treaty settlements, at universities, libraries, museums, government departments, statutory authorities, historical societies, heritage groups, research organisations, claimant groups, and for private companies. Many of our members are also independent or freelance historians. What binds us is our expertise in and our commitment to understanding history and how history lives with us in Aotearoa, New Zealand. FANZA advocates on behalf of our community, promotes professional standards, and lends weight to issues of relevance. FANZA opposes the Treaty Principles Bill as being based on a disingenuous historical narrative that presents a badly distorted understanding of the treaty as a founding constitutional document in Aotearoa. And I'll hand over to Dr. Matthew Woodbury to explain more.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you to the committee for considering FANZA's submission alongside hundreds of others. Many speakers have probably addressed the impact that this bill will have in the future, but historians look to the past, and we look to the past to explain continuity and change over time. Because fundamentally, the relationship between the Crown and tangata whenua has been continuous since 1840, but that relationship has certainly not always been stable. One important change occurred in 1975 when the term treaty principles was introduced into legislation. But shifts in how we understand treaty principles has a much longer history, and debate about the meaning and implications of the Treaty of Waitangi extends back to February 1840. It is important to acknowledge that change in national awareness about the meaning and implications of the treaty has often occurred as a result of actions that happened outside of Parliament. But in our setting today, however, I think it's important to consider some examples of conversations that happened inside this House and how your parliamentary predecessors have understood treaty principles. In this country's first Parliament in 1855, members considered how the government of the day might give effect to the treaty in ways that were, quote, faithfully, honestly, and liberally. Conversely, during debate in 1944, one member of Parliament was critical of what we'd now identify as the principle of redress when he characterized many Māori grievances as, quote, imaginary, unquote. In the 1987 debate, one minister, when introducing a piece of legislation, spoke to its power and potential, that it was a working example of the government's commitment to the concept of partnership as set out in the Treaty of Waitangi. FANZA respectfully submits that this bill interprets treaty principles in a manner that is very narrowly confined to this time and this parliamentary context. FANZA considers that such an approach is short-sighted and is one that overlooks 185 years of conversation about the meaning of the treaty, conversations that have occurred both within this building and in places far from it. I'll leave Dr. Paul Husbands to conclude FANZA's submission. Thank you.
In its general policy statement, we are told that the overarching object of this bill is to define what the principles of a Treaty of Waitangi are in statute, in order, one, to promote a national conversation about the place of a treaty and its principles in our constitutional arrangements, create a more robust and widely understood conception of New Zealand's constitutional arrangements, and build consensus about the treaty, Te Tiriti, and our constitutional arrangements that will promote greater legitimacy and social cohesion. It is FANZ's strong contention that these objectives can only be achieved through a comprehensive and honest understanding of our nation's history. This would include not only an accurate understanding of the situation and circumstances in which the Treaty of Waitangi came to be signed in 1840, but also of what came before and what has happened since. Aotearoa before 1840 was a dynamic and diverse society of independent and self-governing hapu and iwi, each with their own distinct histories and genealogies developed over hundreds of years of human settlement. In the decades immediately before and after 1840, these communities confronted the enormous challenges and embraced the many opportunities that came with integration into the wider world. After 1840, Māori, as the indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, faced the additional challenges of interacting with a new British government and living with an ever-increasing population of settlers from Europe and other parts of the world. Unfortunately, as in the histories of other colonial societies, this interaction was not always peaceful, and for Māori involved dispossession, exclusion, trauma, and loss. It also, however, produced impressive examples of resilience, resistance, initiative, and innovation, as hapu and iwi and other Māori organisations struggle to retain a degree of autonomy and control over their land, resources, and language. In order to understand where we are and where we are going, it is necessary to first understand who we are and how we got here. Fortunately, we as a nation have been greatly assisted in this endeavour by the work of the Waitangi Tribunal. In the course of the last 4 decades, the Tribunal has been engaged in an internationally unparalleled and widely admired work of historical recovery and reconciliation. From Muriwhenua in the north to the rohi of Ngāi Tahu in the south, from Taranaki to Tuuruwera and Turanganui-a-Kiwa, the Tribunal has slowly but surely inquired into the history of our nation, as it was experienced by hapu and iwi, who after 1840 became the Crown's treaty partners. This monumental work has involved not only archival research by professional historians such as myself and other members of FANZA, but also oral and traditional histories, as well as kōrero tukuiho, history handed down, and testimony presented by Māori claimants and spokespeople in person. In order to hear all of this, the Tribunal has travelled to marae across the country, including many remote and rural places. Once all of the research, oral testimony, and submissions have been heard for a particular district, the Tribunal, again with the assistance of professional historians, some of whom are FANZA members, and other writers, have embarked on the massive task of producing a report. Many of these Waitangi Tribunal reports have become essential reading. In our submission as professional historians, FANZA members and citizens, it is our submission that if we as Aotearoa New Zealand are going to truly have a national conversation and build consensus about the Treaty Te Tiriti, it should be based on the firm foundation of a historical work that has been produced by the Waitangi Tribunal and is part of the Tribunal and Treaty claim process. If we really want to have a national conversation and create consensus about Te Tiriti and its place in Aotearoa New Zealand going forward, a shared, accurate and informed understanding of our common history is indispensable. Through our research, writing and work in museums, archives, libraries and other institutions of memory across the country, FANZA members have been and will continue working towards this essential goal. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Paul. We've probably got time for one quick question from Taumata, Paul.
Thank you for coming to visit us today and for your expertise and for your submission. Do you think that there's a lack of understanding of the history of Te Tiriti, and do you think that that's a consequence of not having a consistent curriculum across our secondary schools?
Yes, I think that was one of the other things I was going to say when I was running out of time, was that unfortunately, although it's world leading and widely admired by many across the world, by many people, the knowledge of what is written in Waitangi Tribunal reports and the research that's been produced is not really well known at all by the general public. And I think one thing which could really help with the knowledge that we need to inform this debate is an effort to make the work of a tribunal and all of the work that surrounded it much more available and accessible to the general public. And there's ways we could do this by making reports, summaries of reports available in shops and libraries, easily accessible, and maybe also resources and material for schools.
Thank you, Paul, Matthew and Elizabeth. Thank you for your time this afternoon. That's the end of the session. So we just want to acknowledge on behalf of the committee you being with us in person to provide your presentation. It's very helpful. We're going to move now to our submission from Martyn Bradbury, and Martyn is joining us online. Kia ora, Martyn. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. We have you before the committee for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to start your presentation.
Kia ora, comrades. I wish to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak on this most crucial of bills and recognise the privilege of being able to do so when 300 others also submitted. To everyone, regardless of which side you supported, thank you for engaging with our democracy. We need more democratic interaction from our citizens, and I congratulate you for participating. It would be remiss of me to not acknowledge the many women and men who have argued so scathingly and brilliantly against this appalling piece of legislation. There are far too many to mention, but I cannot begin without saluting the criticisms of Professor Jane Kelsey, Hilda Harawira, Chris Finlayson-Dean, Jenny Shipley, Helmut Modlik, Kitty Allen, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, unions, Māori organisations, churches, academics, political scientists, the incredible voices of our young people. You have all, in your insight and oversight, done us immense pride in articulating the egalitarian values of this nation in a way that will echo down the corridors of time. You are speaking to the future of our nation when our children's children look back into the annals of time to hear your words, your fierceness, and your righteousness. It is an honour to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in this fight. To the committee, I'm here to speak against this appalling piece of legislation that is an affront to everything we believe in a liberal progressive democracy with the egalitarian values that New Zealand is founded upon. I believe that many of my fellow citizens do not know that there were two treaties. They do not know that the two treaties mean different things, and they certainly do not know that New Zealand has signed up to UN obligations that state when in this exact situation, where there are two versions of a treaty, that the Indigenous version takes precedence. Comrades, many of our fellow citizens do not understand that means Māori never ceded sovereignty. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting for 1 millisecond that the New Zealand state is not sovereign. Of course it is. It is a tax system, a judiciary, the police, the military. The New Zealand state is sovereign. But the Indigenous people of this country never ceded sovereignty. So how does a liberal progressive democracy with universal suffrage, the 40-hour working week, and nuclear-free values respect a treaty with the Indigenous people who didn't cede sovereignty? As per usual, dear old New Zealand's number 8 wire pragmatism created the treaty principles, a rough, amorphous, spongy set of legal values that allowed for the relationship between the Crown and Māori, who hadn't ceded sovereignty, a means of pragmatically working together and sharing the legal rights guaranteed to them in the treaty. By replacing the treaty principles with Act's ludicrous mutilation, the state would no longer be under obligation to engage with Māori. It would sever that relationship, snuffing out the self-sovereignty and agency promised by the treaty to implement a banal list of words masquerading as fairness. Act are manipulating many voters' ignorance to endorse legislation that would gut the very fairness they pretend to fight for. The tyranny of the majority deciding the legal right of the Indigenous minority is the very antithesis of the democratic values this country was built upon. The cavalcade of political circus freaks who have spoken on behalf of this Trojan horse abomination have mounted an intellectual and philosophical defense that borders on a cross-burning, banjo-twanging redneck jamboree. Not one argument in favor of this legislation stands up to any scrutiny and highlights the truth that this is a bad faith debate, and that is ultimately what shames every single one of us. Do we need a constructive debate about the constitutional arrangement of our nation? Sure do. Is this bad faith, false narrative, political stunt process being paraded through Select Committee a constructive debate about the constitutional arrangements of our nation? Certainly not. We should all be ashamed of this bitter and willfully ignorant race-baiting stunt that is only proceeded because the great negotiator and corporate deal superhero, Chris Luxon, was so desperate to become Prime Minister that he allowed himself to be snookered by David Seymour into agreeing to this. The yellow quick fox has jumped all over the lazy blue hog. Chris Luxon's craven incompetence at allowing a David Seymour political stunt to get this far while admitting it has no chance at all of passing is needless cruelty to our nation. We have brothers and sisters and whānau who are just holding on in this never-ending cost of living crisis. 400,000 are on benefits and 160,000 kids are suffering in poverty. And that community is asked to step up and fight a needless act of malice. It is emotionally exhausting to people already vulnerable and compounds the cruelty of this. Too many Kiwis are just trying to pay the bills to survive without having to fight this spite, or because Christopher Luxon wanted to tick Prime Minister in his CV. This bill isn't a divisive dog whistle, it's a racist canine trumpet. A bad faith process for a bad faith government that will enable corporate interests at the cost of Indigenous rights at a time when they are attempting to open the country up to more exploitative resource taking. Māori have cultural memory of the first wave of white settler capitalist exploitation resource taking. They have the flax roots knowledge of what sustainability and environmental protection looks like. It is no wonder that international right-wing think tanks always aim to attack Indigenous rights first to enable the next generation of exploitative resource stripping. On a global warming planet, the treaty can protect all our rights when corporations come with their vampire capitalism. Newsroom reports the hikoi on Parliament at 84,000. That incredible turnout tells us a vast cross-section of Aotearoa New Zealand civil society, Pākehā, Pacifica, Asian New Zealander, Indian New Zealander, the rainbow community, the disabled community, working class, middle class, churches, unions, NGOs, a majority of us see the treaty as a unique symbol of hope and optimism that should be celebrated, not weaponized into a race-baiting divisiveness. I'm a 51-year-old heteronormative Pākehā cis male. Not once in my life have I been negatively impacted by any legislative policy that enables Māori to have the same agency I enjoy in our egalitarian country. My daughter is a Kiwi, and because I believe the treaty grants me access to this country, I felt she as a New Zealander had the birthright to access the tauanga of the Māori culture. So she's been enrolled in Māori immersion classes all her life. And when she does a karakia in the mother tongue of my country at my table, it connects me to this land in a way unlike any other. 70% of Māori are under the age of 40. The future is younger, browner and prouder. The next generation of Māori won't accept being second-class citizens in their own homeland, and they will grow up beside Pākehā, Pacifica, Asian and Indian Kiwis who are culturally secure enough in their own identity that they don't see the celebration of Māori as a lessening of their own self. The next generation deserves a debate far more respectful than this race-baiting political stunt. The treaty is to be honoured, not settled. In solidarity, I yield the rest of my time to the committee for questions.
Thank you, Martyn. I'll give you a chance to have a brief bit of respite before we get a question from Dr. Russell. Thank you, Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Martyn, at the start of your presentation, you ran through quite a wide-ranging list of eminent New Zealanders who've spoken out against this bill. Do you have a similar wide-ranging list of eminent New Zealanders who are in favour of this bill?
Oh, we've seen such, I mean, well, they've had nothing to be able to put forward to actually stand up and make the claim that this is a solution to a problem that has any solution this way. You can't simply take a whole bunch of nonsense, package it together, sell it to the most reactionary New Zealanders and claim that's a constitutional process. It isn't. It's embarrassing to all of us.
So no one that you know of in particular
No, hang on. Well,
speaking
no,
in favour
sorry,
of it?
sorry,
Not at
Dr.
all.
Russ. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, folks. Look, supplementary questions will go through the chair as well. We do have
Oh,
other
sorry,
people.
try Chair.
Simon Court will go a question from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And how good to have Bomber Bradbury at Justice Committee today.
Comrade.
Bomber, you've described the debate as being in bad faith.
Yes.
Bomber, don't you think that framing the debate and using pejoratives to describe those people like David Seymour, who studied philosophy and has an engineering and philosophy degree, to describe this as a political stunt, banjo twanging, race baiting, and an example of vampire capitalism, don't you think that that's bad faith to respond to the minister's proposal for a bill that says all New Zealanders are equal before the law?
I know David. I've known him quite well for about 7 years. He's my elected MP. When I had a problem with the police, he stepped in and helped me in my case when they breached my civil rights. So I've certainly had a chance to talk to David many times, and he is, you're right, a very intelligent, very smart bloke. But on this issue, he is utterly and totally wrong. And the whole debate, I think, has been misplaced, and I don't think it has served him well.
Thanks, Martyn. Thanks, Simon. Look, thank you, Martyn, for your time this afternoon. We look forward to your summary on your next podcast.
Thanks,
you, folks. We'll appreciate your time as well. Let's move on to a submission now from UNICEF Aotearoa New Zealand. And joining us on behalf of UNICEF will be Michelle Sharp, and I think we've got Teresa Tapania Ashton as well. So thanks, Scott. We'll hand over to you straight away for your 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to submit to you, the decision makers and duty bearers. And as just laid out, given the volume of submissions, we are very privileged to be able to make this oral submission today. So just want to say thank you. So kia ora koutou, ko Michelle Sharp toku ingoa. My name is Michelle Sharp and I am the CEO of UNICEF Aotearoa. I'll just hand over to Teresa to introduce herself. Oh, you're on mute, Teresa.
Kia ora koutou, ko Teresa Tipene Ashton tōku ingoa. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Programs for UNICEF Aotearoa.
Thank you, Teresa. I just want to also acknowledge my colleagues and especially the Chair of UNICEF Aotearoa, Simon Wirutene, who joins us today. So thank you for joining us, Simon. I saw you in the background earlier. So you'll know UNICEF Aotearoa is mandated to uphold children's rights as enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we've just heard about. And New Zealand has been a signatory of the convention for well over 30 years. Not only that, this is one of the most subscribed conventions in the world. Now, we know that here in New Zealand, there are over 1.2 million tamariki and rangatahi here in Aotearoa. That's almost a quarter of our population. And this bill will have a detrimental effect on all of them, and especially tamariki and rangatahi Māori. So for that reason, UNICEF Aotearoa categorically rejects this bill in its entirety and calls for Te Tiriti o Waitangi to be upheld as one of our founding constitutional documents. So to maximise our time, we're going to take our submission as read. Today, there are 3 specific things that we would like to highlight to you as the committee. We want to reiterate that tamariki a toanga. We want to talk about the idea of equal rights, and we want to reiterate the importance of children and young people's voices in this process. I'm going to hand to Teresa, our Director of Advocacy and Programs. She's going to take us through these issues. Over to you, Teresa.
Thanks, Michelle. As mentioned by Michelle, first we want to reiterate that tamariki a taonga. Tamariki a taonga is protected under Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Tamariki a taonga is the future decision makers and descendants of our decisions and actions now. Tamariki a taonga and are the future citizens we must pave the way for. Protecting tamariki as taonga aligns with the protections for children enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And because children are inherently more vulnerable, both physically and emotionally, they are dependent on adults, and therefore there are a special set of rights that apply to them through the convention. In the same way that New Zealand recognises that special protections are required for women and for people with disabilities to prevent discrimination, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child recognises that children need special and specific protection to access the same fundamental human rights. The impacts of colonisation on Indigenous people also require these additional protections for Indigenous people, including Indigenous children, to access their rights. Secondly, we want to talk about the idea of equal rights. In principle, many of us agree that equal rights for everyone is important. But equal rights in true practice does not mean that everyone is treated the same. To have equal rights where all tamariki experience the same opportunities to realise their special rights as children, different approaches are required and different levels of research resource are required. This might mean some populations require something different than others to be able to equally realise their rights. Instead, if equal rights are meant to be taking the same approaches to each issue, in practice, this means we will continue to see things like the worsening of child poverty stats. On Thursday, New Zealand Stats released the updated data that shows that the number of children living in material hardship grew from 144,000 to 156,600,000 in 2024. Māori are experiencing 1.8 times the suicide rate compared to non-Māori. Also, Māori children are more likely to grow up in estate care, making 69% of the in-care population, despite only 27% of Māori being under 18. So what we really want to see is equity, and Te Tiriti o Waitangi ensures that an equitable approach for Māori will be taken when this is honoured, respected, and implemented as intended. From a personal standpoint, my eldest granddaughter, who is 17 years of age, she's been raised with a strong understanding and belief of her rights under Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its principles. Therefore, it wasn't surprising to see her participating in the Toitu Te Tiriti hikoi alongside many of her friends. When I inquired about her reason for joining, she expressed that she was shocked that her identity and rights as a young Māori were being questioned. So continuing in her words and the voices of many other children and young people who joined in that hikoi, her words, toitu te tiriti, ake, ake, ake. Thirdly and finally, I want to reiterate the importance of children and young people's voices in this process. Their Article 12 right under the Convention on the Rights of the Child enshrines their right to be heard and to be part of decision-making that affects them. For example, listen to Anaru Bert Mikaere, the rangatahi rangatira, who spoke alongside the Chief Children's Commissioner and said, Te Tiriti has helped me to realise my potential as a young Māori and the importance of our future and our future generations of rangatahi in care. He Māori aho, I am Māori. And this treaty was made to protect our nation, our Māori and our mokopuna that are yet to come. Or listen to the son of submitter Horiana Irwin Easthope, who wrote in his submission, this bill does not reflect the treaty or any of its proclaimed principles. This bill is dangerous. His submission asked the Select Committee to abandon this process at this point in time. Listen to what our children are saying. Respect their rights. We urge you to stop this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And yes, just want to reiterate, let's listen to children and respect their rights. Thank you, Teresa, and thanks to all of you. And of course, if you have any questions, we're happy. Got a couple of minutes left to answer anything.
Thanks, Michelle. We do have a question from Rachel Brooker.
Hello, thank you. Teresa, you touched on the word equity in your submission. Do you want to talk about the difference as you see it between equity and equality and why that's important for children?
Absolutely. Look, equity ensures that everyone has equal opportunity and access to the same opportunities as anyone else. And so equal means that, yes, we can all turn up to school and be taught together. However, equity means that Māori children are are receiving education that really entitles them as within their own identity and their own right and their own upbringing. And to me, that's where the differences are.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Rachel. There being no further questions from the committee, I'll just like to thank you both for being with us this afternoon and providing your submission on behalf of UNICEF. We do appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move to our last submission for this session before we take a quick break. It's going to be from Te Papa-o-Rotu Marae, and I think joining us online we might have Parikawhia McLean, correct?
Tēnā koe te he mana, e te kingi o ko tahitanga, kingi tuheitia pōtutou te wherowhero, te tuawhitu ki te rangi. E te kuini nā waihono I te pō ki te whenua. E te he mana, koutou nā committee member, tēnā koutou katoa. On behalf of the chair and trustees of Te Papa-o-Rotu, I'm here today representing the voices of our pā, our marae community. Some of them are here with me in the wharenui. Others are online as we speak now. Our pā is located on the outskirts of Herearoha, Hamilton and Whatawhata, under the shadow of our maunga, Pirongia, and our tūpuna awa, the Waipā River. We have over 3,600 members and we are growing. There are many more to come. That whakapapa to the pā. We are second only in size to Tūranga Waiwai in Ngārawahia. We are mahanga haurua, proud and hard. While we will take our written submission as read, I make the following additional points. Tuatahi, we are a kingitanga marae and support mana motuhake and the exercise of rangatiratanga over the affairs of our pā, our whenua, our paiao. Tuarua, we are one of 68 Waikato marae that 30 years ago supported the late Māori Queen, Te Ariki Nui, Te Atairangi Kāhu, and Sir Robert Mahuta, tribal negotiator, to settle the historic Raupatu confiscation of whenua claim. The Crown accepted the confiscation was wrong and unjust and apologised for the breaches and the mamai the hurt caused. Queen Elizabeth II herself signed the Settlement Act. That settlement is founded on Te Tiriti o Waitangi as outlined in the preamble to the Waikato Raupatu Settlement Act of 1995. Mahanga Haurua has other non-Raupatu claims which we are seeking redress from the Crown. Again, the basis is Te Tiriti o Waitangi, not the version that is being wrongly promulgated in the bill. Our pā, like many across the motu, seeks to uplift our members from our mokopuna to our kaumātua and to grow a prosperous future. We are intergenerational in our focus. In closing, what would be his final koroneihana last year, Kingi Tuheitia said, we must work in kotahitanga if we are to move forward as a nation. This bill does nothing but the opposite. One of the key aspects of treaty settlements is to ensure their durability. They will stand the test of time. Mahanga Haurua want the remaining aspects of our claims to be considered on the same fundamental principles that were established in the Waikato Raupatu whenua and river settlements. This bill creates an uneven playing field for those remaining outstanding claims, and that is inherently unfair because it creates two settlement classes for our people. We therefore reject and strongly oppose the principles of Treaty of Waitangi Bill in its entirety. It is divisive and ruthlessly causing harm to the Māori-Crown relationship, not just in the Waikato, but across the motu. Nō reira, he kōrero whakakapi ngā kingi tū heitia anō, tākiri tū te kotahitanga, tākiri tū te mana motuhake, kai marere kia tātou. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, kia ora koutou. Thank you for your submission. We'll start with a couple of questions first from Simon Court and then Rachel Brookham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your submission. It was really interesting to hear that perspective. I'm interested in your submission, paragraph 13, recommendations, where you implore the government to focus on the real issues facing New Zealanders. You refer to race baiting, which sounds awful. You also refer to capitalist greed. And I'm just wondering what you mean by that, because we have heard that from a number of submitters. They're concerned about capitalism. And I'm wondering if you might be able to give a response in context that the marae that you represent, I understand, you could confirm this for me, as one of the beneficiaries of the Raupatu settlement, and also has representation on Tainui Group Holdings, which holds 1.4 billion in assets and returned nearly $270 million profit on those assets in 2022. So I'm trying to understand what is the opposition to capitalism that's coming through in this submission?
So the way I think of that is, and that's why I made mention of the border settlement, of which we are one of 68 marae, and that historical context, the confiscation of whenua, which essentially took away our economic opportunity from that time. So the settlement is an opportunity for us to rebuild the economic, not only the economic, the social, environmental consequences for our iwi. So I do, again, if I come back to our written submission, I think there are a number of examples that illustrate the direction that the coalition government is going in, and we do not support it.
Well, just a
They're
quick
inconsistent
follow-up.
with the DTO principles, Bill.
One follow-up.
Yeah, well, I mean, given that this government has made it very clear that the government's keen to grow the economy, cut red tape, liberalise planning laws, make it easier for people to use their land. They've done a whole lot of things around making it easier to hire and fire people who aren't good employees. Don't you think that actually the government's done a lot to help people use their assets to grow their business and to become more wealthy? And I'm just trying to understand how all the things the government's doing that are positive appear not to have landed, because your submission quite clearly uses the term capitalist greed as if owning assets and making a profit is somehow wrong, while your iwi and your hapu and your marae appear to benefit from capitalism.
So in response to your question about whether this government is doing that, the law is still being made in some cases, so we don't really know because it's still being executed and implemented. The growth of our settlement has happened over 30 years. But again, as I say, the settlement is in response to successive generations that have suffered as a consequence of the confiscation of the raupatu of whenua in Waikato.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Parikawhia. We'll go to Rachel Brookham, please.
Thank you, and thank you for your submission. I noted in your oral submission you talked about treaties, settlements and treaty issues, and not the version in this bill. So it makes it sound, and correct me if I'm wrong or not, that's why I'm asking, this is why I'm asking the question, that you think that the principles in the bill are trying to be another version of the treaty, and if I'm correct in that, and then how that links to the conversation you've just been having with Simon Court about capitalism, and whether the principles very much focus on private property, in your opinion, more than the articles of the treaty.
So the principles, I mean, they have been constructed without the treaty partner. So they've been constructed unilaterally, which is the point we made in our written submission, as opposed to the articles. And there are two versions of the treaty. So Te Tiriti Waitangi and Te Reo Māori and the Treaty Waitangi. So this version that we have has been, like as I said before, has been designed without the treaty partner.
Thanks, Parikawhia. Are there any further questions If not, what we'll do is we will just thank you all for being with us this afternoon, for providing your submission. It's greatly appreciated that you've taken the time to be with us and for answering those questions as well. So just want to acknowledge that and to thank you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa.
Right, folks, we are right on time for a break. So we are going to break for 15 minutes and we're going to return at 3:15 for a submission from Hamish Morgan, and we'll finish off our afternoon. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are back online. Can't use this because that's big. So we'll reconvene our submissions this afternoon, and the first one is from Hamish Morgan. And Hamish is joining us online.
Afternoon.
Hamish, thanks for joining the committee. If we can just get you to turn your camera on, please.
Of course.
There you are, we can see you. Hey, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We've got you for a 5-minute slot, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. Hey, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. It's a very important issue, and I'm grateful to be able to give my say on it. Growing up in New Zealand, I've always believed we live in one of the greatest countries in the world. I'm extremely proud of our nation, its values, achievements, and the spirit of fairness that once defined it. However, over the last 50 years, we've moved away from our egalitarian foundations towards an ever-growing cultural hegemony. Since the mid-1970s, New Zealanders have been increasingly categorised into two groups, Māori and non-Māori. The very existence of this debate we're having today proves we are no longer one people under one law, but a nation grappling with division. We must ask ourselves, how did we reach a point where rights are determined by ethnicity rather than by universal principles of justice? A key factor in this divide is the vague and ever-changing concept of treaty principles. These principles, used in courts, government departments, and universities, have no clear definition. This ambiguity has allowed multiple, sometimes contradictory interpretations, many of which undermine unity and fairness. How can we have a just and consistent legal system when its foundational principles are undefined? This is why we must have a national discussion. Defining the treaty principles would provide clarity, and in doing so, lay the foundations for a constitutional framework that ensures justice and equality for all New Zealanders. The Treaty Principles Bill accomplishes this by bringing the conversation to the people. This is not about denying the significance of the Treaty of Waitangi. It is about ensuring its interpretation is fair, clear, and consistent. But first, we must define justice as a nation. What kind of justice will we uphold? What is morally right when shaping our country's constitution? Justice at its core is about fairness, equality, and moral rightness. But who gets to decide what is just? Justice should be determined by principles that apply universally to all citizens, regardless of their background or identity. In fact, this is how the Department of Justice defines justice, a fair and transparent process that protects the rights of all people. Some argue that the treaty guarantees special rights for Māori based on partnership. But the idea of a treaty partnership is a modern construct, not found in the original text. The treaty promised Māori the same rights and protections as all British subjects, equality before the law, not preferential treatment. If justice is to be fair, it must apply the same to all people, regardless of heritage. In a free democratic society, it is the people, by way of referendum or electoral vote, who ultimately decide what is just. This bill seeks to clarify the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, directly influencing how justice is administered. Such an important matter must be decided by all New Zealanders through a democratic process. So, as we consider this, we must ask ourselves, are we upholding a justice system that is truly fair? Are all people, regardless of ethnicity, equal under the law? What does it mean to act justly? To act justly means to treat people equally before the law, ensuring that all people, regardless of status, have an equal opportunity to the rights and responsibilities endowed to them at birth. It requires that no one is advantaged or disadvantaged because of their ethnicity. The Treaty Principles Bill includes the principle of right to equality, stating that everyone is entitled to equal protection and benefit of the law without discrimination, and thus meets the requirements for a just principle. By contrast, the current interpretation of treaty principles grants different rights and privileges based on ethnicity. This practice contradicts our commitment to fairness and unity. If treaty interpretations lead to different rules for different groups, then justice is not being served, it is being divided. So, a path forward. The Treaty of Waitangi is a foundational document that must be honoured with integrity and truth. However, it must be interpreted in a way that unites all New Zealanders, while respecting cultural heritage and ensuring equality under the law. True justice recognises the past but commits to a future where every New Zealander is treated equally. To conclude, justice must be impartial, consistent, and blind to race or identity. The Treaty Principles Bill upholds these ideals, ensuring that no one is advantaged or disadvantaged based on ethnicity. Only then can we build a fair and unified society. This bill must be brought to a referendum. As was said in 1840, he iwi tahi tato. We are now one people. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish. That's the 5 minutes we've got this afternoon. So just on behalf of the committee, can we thank you for providing your oral presentation and being with us this afternoon?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
As we go now to our submission from Ngati Paoa Iwi Trust, and joining us is Herearoha Skipper, who's the chair of the trust. Herearoha, kia ora, thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koutou. Ko ngā kupu o te whakapāha nā te karuna ki a mātou o Ngāti Paoa, ki o mātou tūpuna me a mātou mokopuna, I tuhia a I kōrerotia e rātou ki te whakaitanga whakataunga. Ka tahi rā ka puta tēnei pire kino rau atu. Tēnā tātou. Ko Herearoha tēnei e mihi atu nei. I am the chair of Ngati Paoa Iwi Trust, presenting on behalf of our iwi, and with me is John Hutton, who is our CEO of the trust, who will also present. So just let me reiterate, Ngati Paoa Iwi Trust does not support this bill. The main point of our submission is this: the treaty principles referred to in this bill are not the same as the treaty principles that underpinned the Ngati Paoa settlement negotiations, and which underpin our Ngati Paoa claims settlement bill, which is currently before Parliament awaiting the third reading. Our settlement bill, like all other settlement legislation, records the Crown's acknowledgements and apology for the historical grievances that are being settled. I bring your attention to clause 14.2 of our bill, which defines the historical claims that are being settled as those that are founded on a right arising from the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles. The treaty principles understood during negotiations and referred to in our bill are those defined by the courts and agreed to by Parliament over numerous treaty settlement acts. There is no confusion about these principles that needs fixing, but the Principles Bill changes these principles. We believe that if the Principles Bill was to be passed, it would breach and render our treaty settlement bill irrational. It makes no sense for there to be two sets of treaty principles. I'll just pass over to John.
Kia ora. I'd like to refer the committee to pages 6 to 8 of our submission, of the trust submission, which talks about clause 8 of the Principles Bill. Now, clause 8, as I'm sure you've discussed before, attempts to protect treaty settlement acts from this Principles Bill. Now, the first and most obvious question is, why should the interpretation of a treaty settlement act need to be protected from the Principles Bill? Our submission is that clause 8 protects nothing, because it is irrational for one set of treaty principles to underpin treaty settlement legislation and for another contradictory set of principles to be applied to all other laws in New Zealand. Equally concerning is the possibility that if passed, this Principles Bill would, at law, create two sets of principles, those in this bill and those in treaty settlement acts. Now, the only people to benefit from such an outcome would be the lawyers, who would spend years arguing before the courts over which set of principles would be applied at any time. Quite simply, it would be a mess, and I'm certain that that's not the kind of outcome that Parliament would be seeking. Kia ora, I'll hand that back to Herearoha.
So I'd just like to conclude by stating that our submission puts the Crown on notice that if the Principles Bill is passed, Ngāti Paoa will consider the Crown to have acted in bad faith over a decade of treaty settlement negotiations, including breaching the deed of settlement. Although we do not wish to, Ngāti Paoa will be forced to seek to renegotiate our deed of settlement or find remedy through the courts, including financial compensation that is many times greater than the mere sum currently agreed to. I expect many other iwi will wish to do the same. We are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you both. Members, are there any questions for John or Herearoha? Rachel Brooklyn.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you can remind the committee of where your settlement process is at and how recent it's been, and what the involvement of this government that's also progressing this legislation has been in that.
So we're in the waiting for the third reading of our treaty settlements to go through Parliament. Initially, we would like to settle with all other hauraki iwi. So we're hoping that that will be done in this year, in 2025.
Another one?
Yeah, supplementary to that. So this government is actively engaging with you because, as you said, you've got your second reading, whilst at the same time doing this other piece of legislation that you've said isn't completely, that is incongruous with your settlement legislation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Is there any further questions? No, there don't appear to be any further questions from the committee. So just want to acknowledge your submission today. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon and for providing your written submission and your supporting oral submission. We appreciate you being before the committee and answering our questions as well.
Kia ora.
So we're going to move to our submission from Greenpeace. Is Greenpeace here? So we'll move now to a submission online from Dr. Russel Norman, who is presenting on behalf of Greenpeace Aotearoa. So Dr. Norman, thank you for being with the committee. I think you're relatively familiar with how these processes work. So I'll hand over to you for the next 10 minutes.
Ina mana, ina waka, ina reo, e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No Uropi, oku tūpuna, I tipu ake o ki aihi tarairia, engari ke tamaki makaurau taku kāinga. Nō reira ka mihi ki te maunga ko Whangārei, mo te moana ko Waitemata, ko Russel Norman tōku ingoa, ko taku tūranga mahi ki Greenpeace Aotearoa, ko te Executive Director. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to all of you on the Select Committee. My ancestors come from Europe. I grew up in Australia. My home is in Auckland, where I acknowledge the mountain Makaere, not far from here, the Waitemata Harbour, where I often go swimming. My name is Russel Norman. I'm the Executive Director of Greenpeace Aotearoa. I'm making this submission on behalf of Greenpeace Aotearoa. Greenpeace is an environment and peace campaigning organisation. It's supported by tens of thousands of New Zealanders, and it's been in Aotearoa, New Zealand for over 50 years. Our analysis is that essentially this bill is an attempt to nullify the treaty, just as Justice Prendergast attempted to nullify the treaty in 1877. It's an attempt to nullify it by removing those rights that were guaranteed to Māori under the treaty. And so we call on the Select Committee to oppose the bill, to reject the bill, and we oppose it for three basic reasons. The first is that by effectively abolishing the treaty, it undermines our ability and other people's ability to protect the environment. And I just wanted to expand a little bit on that. There are many cases across New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, where groups have used Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the principles of the treaty to protect the environment from environmental destruction. That's both Pākehā groups as well as Māori groups. And I just wanted to dig into a recent case, which is the seabed mining case. So there's an Australian mining company called Trans-Tasman Resources based in Sydney. And what Trans-Tasman Resources would like to do is to mine the seabed in the South Taranaki Bight. So that would cause truly immense environmental harm by not only the immediate destruction of the seabed in the many square kilometres that they would mine, but also as the sediment, the underwater sediment spread across the ocean floor, the benthic environment would be smothered over many hundreds of square kilometres. On top of that, the water column would be full of sediment so that filter feeders like pygmy blue whales that live in that area would struggle to feed in that area. So it's an important environmental battle, one of the iconic environmental battles that will determine the future of the natural environment in the oceans of Aotearoa, New Zealand. In the court case that eventually ended up in the Supreme Court, the litigants, which was Greenpeace, but also iwi and hapu groups like Ngati Ruanui from South Taranaki, we found ourselves the winners in that case. And the mining application by Trans-Tasman Resources, this Australian mining company, was stopped. And there were two basic grounds for us winning that. One was environmental. So obviously this immensely destructive environmental project, the Supreme Court ruled against it just because of its pure environmental destruction. But secondly, there was also treaty grounds. So the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi were breached because of the tikanga of Ngati Ruanui and others. So in that Supreme Court ruling, the Treaty of Waitangi and the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi that this bill seeks to completely eliminate were fundamental in us being able to protect the moana from this terribly destructive project. So that's the first reason that we oppose this bill to essentially negate the treaty. Secondly, the second reason is kind of a slightly more tactical, which is that in many environmental battles, we form alliances with iwi and hapu up and down the country in order to protect the environment. So, for example, one of the great battles in terms of climate change is the battle around oil and gas exploration. We know from the International Energy Association that we can't afford to burn existing fossil fuels. And so any government that's looking to explore for new fossil fuels is essentially trying to accelerate the climate crisis. In New Zealand, there was a very long battle over which I was involved in and many others, trying to end oil and gas exploration. And our key allies in those battles were iwi and hapu, Te Whanau Apanui, just to name one. And their ability to have rights and have standing in those battles was underpinned by Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the principles of the treaty. So in terms of just those battles, it's tremendously important for us that the treaty is protected. And thirdly, the third reason we're opposed to it, and I think the most important really, is it's simply wrong for the Crown to attempt to revoke the treaty and this agreement with tangata whenua without even consulting tangata whenua, and to remove Māori rights. It's a fundamentally wrong approach for the Crown to take. And I think we really should value the treaty as a unique New Zealand invention, if you like. It is a unique New Zealand framework to grapple with our uncomfortable history of colonisation. The treaty, with all its strengths and weaknesses, it has formed a framework in which we as a society have attempted to come to terms with the history of violent colonisation in this country. Now, over time, the meaning of the treaty has evolved, the principles have evolved, as we as a society have matured to face the reality of colonisation and the stealing of land, the violent stealing of land that happened in this country. And anyone who's bothered to read the history of this land will know about the land wars throughout the 19th century, plus all the other confiscations that happened into the 20th century. The British government, the provincial government, used extreme violence to steal land from Māori. This is simply an historic fact. And a nation that refuses to face up its history and to find some kind of complicated justice, which it's always going to be complicated, a nation which can't face its history is a nation that will never grow up. Prendergast said the treaty, Justice Prendergast in 1877, he said the treaty was worthless because it was signed between a civilised nation and a group of savages who were not capable of signing a treaty. and hence it was a simple nullity. Let us actively reject the racism of Prendergast in 1877. Let us actively embrace an Aotearoa which is mature enough to have a truthful conversation about our shared past and our shared future. Te Tiriti o Waitangi provides a framework for that conversation and for us to try to find some degree of justice through that conversation. Simply pretending colonisation never happened does not mean it's going to go away. So we would urge you to reject the bill, both to protect the natural environment, which the Treaty of Waitangi has been an important tool to protect the wonders of this incredible set of islands that we're so lucky to live in, but also so that we can all be part of a mature nation that faces up to its history and tries to find some kind of justice together going forward. That's me.
Thank you, Dr. Norman. Members, probably time for one quick question, if anyone has any questions for Greenpeace. No, there appear to be none around the room. So look, it just falls to me to thank you for your time this afternoon, Dr. Norman. We appreciate the time you put into the written submission and also for appearing before us this afternoon. It is greatly appreciated.
Kia ora.
We're going to move now to a submission from, let me just turn the page, apologies. Linda Te Aho. So Linda, I think, is joining us online. We don't appear to have the loading. No, one. There's no Linda here. Okay, well, unless we've got the team from Y262 with us either.
If you want to, we could go to Kay Jones, who's available.
Kay, if you don't mind, if you are willing to jump ahead of the queue and come before us.
As you know, Minister, I've done this before.
You have. It's very helpful having you be with us for half the day. So what we'll do is we'll promote Kay up the batting order, and we'll invite you to join us at the table. So Kay, thank you for joining us. We have you for 5 minutes this afternoon, but my suspicion is if you run a little bit over, we won't be too upset given that you're helping us out and filling a gap. So let me just put that on the clock for you, and I'll hand over to you to begin your submission.
Yes, no, because, kia ora, I'm Kay Jones, I'm a fifth generation Pākehā New Zealander, and I oppose the bill. I hope you don't mind, I've read a little bit from notes because so much of the stuff is blowing minds, and so I'm trying to, as well as my written submission, which you'll have received, I'm just going to share a few personal reflections on history, promises, the law, and the importance of Te Tiriti o Waitangi for many people, including faith communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So, as a child growing up in Aotearoa, I was taught to keep my promises and to expect others to keep theirs. So, I was not talking about the Treaty of Waitangi, and the lessons that we received on land wars were short and did not cover the full context. Perhaps I should say that I went to school in the 1960s before some of you were born. When I started work, I learnt about laws and rules as a way that people agree to something and promise to abide by them. Many rules aren't codified but are socially adopted, like queuing for a ticket or to enter an event. Some rules have the backing of the law, like the road code and driving on the left side of the road. When I started work as a teenager, I also learnt about laws, specific laws like the Minimum Wage Act, and about people who, like my employer, broke the laws for their own benefit without any recompense. That betrayal was one of the reasons why later on I joined a union. I'm pleased to read today that the House will soon be voting on the Crimes Theft by Employer Amendment Bill, and I hope that that bill will pass into law. As a public servant, many years ago, I learnt about the legal place of the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Tiriti o Waitangi as we now know it. I also remember heated discussions about whether principles of the treaty should be included in law. Some people expressed concern with this in case it represented a watering down of the commitment to Te Tiriti itself. However, as a policy advisor, I do what I was told. I learnt to administer rules, interpret them, draft first cuts of laws for Parliamentary Council to improve. I learnt to have a great deal of respect for the law in all of its forms and to see it as a special kind of promise towards fair dealing. Later on, when working for the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions Te Kawai, I learnt about international agreements. My work there included drafting reports on New Zealand's compliances and breaches of agreements and preparing submissions on matters like trade agreements with other countries. I made sure to include references to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the New Zealand government commitments on those, on matters which other countries needed to respect also. And if you refer to documents like the Free Trade Agreement with South Korea, there is a Treaty of Waitangi clause that I was one of the people who was involved in insisting that it be included there, which of course protects intellectual property and those matters of shared knowledge, like traditional healing knowledge, which is not an individual copyrighted matter, but is something that the knowledge is harder to defend in an international court if you don't have Treaty of Waitangi principles. Sorry, that's just a jump in. Fundamentally, laws are promises on how people should behave. Oh, I'm now almost out of time.
No, you're fine. You can keep going.
So when researching for this, I went through Dame Sian Elias's history of our laws and how the Treaty of Waitangi is treated, and I've included a link to that, and that's on the court's website, so obviously the government's okay with that. And in that, she quotes, as I do in my written submission, New Zealand's first Chief Justice, Sir William Martyn, who was our justice from 1841 to 1857, who, as a good Christian who believed in fair dealing and promises, was concerned about the Treaty of Waitangi not being honoured. He said, "The compact is binding irrevocably. We cannot repudiate it so long as we retain the benefits which we obtained by it." Now, this bill, by watering down the commitment to the treaty itself, which is far more complex than an AI-generated version of it for summary, which is how it reads, watering it down effectively is like negating the treaty, and we've heard from many people sharing this. But touching on that other point that I raised about the importance to faith communities. While the Treaty Principles Bill doesn't directly change Te Tiriti of Waitangi or the Treaty of Waitangi, it creates unnecessary ambiguity and uncertainty in many areas. Religious communities have a very strong respect for the treaty and the fact that Article 4, which some see as an actual part of Te Tiriti and others see as a parallel document, but that commitment by to the bishops and other faith communities in 1840, where Governor Hobson affirmed that the several faiths of England, of Wesleyans and of Rome, of Maori custom shall alike be protected, and this was translated into Maori as being a commitment to freedom of religious belief. Now, when I, as a member of the Wellington interfaith community, was part of the discussions forming the Statement of Religious Diversity, we discussed how important it was that that foundational document, the treaty, enabled people to come here, to live here and follow their own beliefs. And attacks on it are, in a way, although there's the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act and the others, the history of that parallel structure and knowledge is really important. So I know I've gone over time and I will stop there, but I'm very happy to answer questions on anything, including capitalist greed.
Thank you, Kay. We do have some time probably for one question. So we've got one there from Simon Court.
Kia ora, Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Kay. Look, I think you've referenced it right at the end. There seems to be a big difference of opinion as to what is this bill trying to do. And I note that in paragraph 3 of your submission, you claim that Te Tiriti give non-Maori inhabitants of New Zealand rights to live here in accordance with laws and customary practice, but it's actually the Bill of Rights which guarantees our right to live here and our rights, our political and other rights. So given that here's two obvious discrepancy in facts versus what you've put in your opening statement, I'm just wondering, how much do you think of the debate and the discourse around the Treaty Principles Bill is actually driven by blown minds rather than people reading the bill and understanding what it's trying to achieve?
When my forebears came to Aotearoa, New Zealand in the 1870s, we did not have a New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. We had welcomed from those people who were living here, provided we followed the practices of the time. There were tensions in some parts of the country, but on the west coast of the South Island and in parts of further south and even in Te Whanganui-a-Tara itself, there was welcome and people working alongside. I have Māori kin who have come into my family through marriage sort of over the years. Now, I reference this history because when you talk about the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, that is a lot younger piece of legislation than Te Tiriti. It is also something that Aotearoa New Zealand is a very diverse community. We have had people from many different countries come here over waves of time, and part of their knowledge of whether they will be welcome or not is how they are treated when they arrive here and how they connect with other communities. And there are certain parts of the country where the relationships between those communities have become very warm and connected. I'm sorry that my te reo is not as great as I would like it to be. I'm not confident to speak in the setting, but it is something that people coming here and working alongside have learned these things. So yes, there are layers of law, and that is one of the reasons why when I refer to AI or machine learning that's very sophisticated but isn't truly intelligent, if you only skip over the words on the page and not the context and the history, then you are missing a great deal of what the law truly means. And that's why you have a judge who has had qualifications and years of interpreting experience, who is settling court cases, and not somebody who has just read an AI summary of it, because it's complex. We've got statutory law, we've got customary law.
So I'll have to cut you off now. We now are a little bit over time.
Yeah.
So look,
So that may not answer Mr.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We will move on now, though. So thank you for stepping up and helping us out this afternoon, for taking that slot.
Thank you very much, Minister, members of the committee.
Sorry. Okay, we do now have representatives from Y262 Taumata Whakapumau with us, and I think we've got, I understand, is it Justice Herearoha?
Ai, tēnā koutou.
Oh, good afternoon, kia ora. We've got you on behalf of Y262 for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'm just going to reset the timer for you, and then I'll hand over to you to begin.
Kia ora.
Over to you.
Tēnā tātou, ko Justice Te Amorangi he taraka tēnei, no te ākaurua o Ngati wai, me ngā awa tuna o Wairewa e mihi ana. I'm deeply saddened to be here today, but I'm here with the strength of my tūpuna and the hope of our mokopuna to come. I take the Taumata Whakapumau submission as read and in strong opposition of this bill. My oral submission is intended to express the voice of the next generation of Y262. Today, we are faced with the reality of a grossly neglectful education system that has peddled racist rhetorics and has allowed a majority of our nation to be misinformed about the true unifying power of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Historical and systemic amnesia has led us to a point where we've forgotten the sanctity of he whakaputanga me Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And I'd like to remind the committee and the government of the words of Tahimi Hinare, who stated that Te Tiriti o Waitangi was sacrosanct, that it should never be entrenched or ratified into law where an honourless government could trample its tapu. And I find it horrific and almost laughable that this government is so quick to forget that its genesis is owed to the generosity of our tūpuna. The treaty principles, bills, and the other atrocities against our people and whenua demonstrate that you've taken their generosity for granted. And we sit here as the next generation as a stark reminder that you've overstepped your jurisdiction. And you have a lot of work to do to mend the relationships that you've broken over the past 180 years. And seeing as though the people who drafted this bill are deeply confused about the constitutional nature of Te Tiriti, I'm happy to lay it out. I'll start by saying that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the document our tupuna signed and agreed to. The English treaty was only signed by 40 rangatira in Manukau, where Te Tiriti wasn't present, and they signed the English document on the understanding that it said what was in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Te Tiriti o Waitangi was an exercise of rangatiratanga, whereby the rangatira of He Whakamenenga decided to alter the constitutional structure of Aotearoa. Tikanga and Kawa were the governing forces of our pre-existing constitutional arrangement. Tikanga and Kawa are a complex system of law that derive from our whakapapa to this whenua. With this as our governing foundation, the rangatira granted the Queen the ability to be rangatira of her own hapu and fit within the existing constitutional structure of this nation. So fundamentally, Te Tiriti o Waitangi allowed for two systems of law to exist in one jurisdiction, so long as the rangatira of the hapu agreed. And where they did not sign Te Tiriti, the Crown had no jurisdiction to govern their own people. That governance sat with the rangatira who exercised their tikanga and kawa. So to be clear, Te Tiriti o Waitangi did not grant Māori special rights based on our race or our ethnicity, because it didn't need to. Our mana and our ability to exercise our tikanga was firmly intact. Te Tiriti, in fact, granted the Queen the right to use her laws to govern her people and prevent their continued breaches of our tapu and our tikanga. I'd also like to address this notion of equality that masks this bill. The racist rhetoric that drives this attack on Te Tiriti assumes that Western law is universally applicable and is therefore a site of equality. That is, if we all participate in the system, we all get an equal chance to thrive. And it is unmistakably clear that you've forgotten that the sole purpose of this government was to advance the capitalist purge of our whenua, our resources, and our people. The system of law therefore relies on the disempowerment of others to create wealth. The system is not a site for equality. It's the justification for exploitation, hidden behind the twisted rhetoric that we're all equal under one law. And there is certainly no honour in willfully oppressing the mana of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So with that being said, you can attempt to extinguish the power of Te Tiriti through the imposition of laws, but the irony is our mana never sat in your house. It's derived from the whenua, and it lies in our ability to exercise our tikanga in a way that upholds the balance of tapu and noa. That mana lies in the hands of tangata whenua who are ready to share their tikanga, to share with those who recognise the oranga that flows when they uphold and live by the tikanga of this whenua. The irony is, this government was born of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and if you attempt to reinterpret its articles to expel its mana and tapu, you expel yourselves, and in fact amplify the ignorance and racism. I runga I tēnā, there's no need to fear the laws of this land. Our tupuna have listened to and have loved this whenua for hundreds of years, and they've left behind the code to live in harmony with it. If we listen, and if we live in tune to the rhythm of Papa Tuanuku, abundance will flow. And tikanga doesn't discriminate based on race. It's applicable to everyone, because it's about how we live as humans in relation to this whenua. So kaua e mataku, kia u ki te oro o tō tātou nei whaia tupuna. My recommendations to you, the Justice Committee and this government, are really opportunities to restore the mana and honour of this Crown and of this government. I recommend that the Treaty Principles Bill goes no further and that there are no considerations for it to be taken to referendum. Our nation is young and poorly educated about the histories of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I don't think we're ready to make decisions that uphold the tapu or the constitutional nature of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I recommend that all elected members of Parliament, their administrators, and their executive undergo extensive tiriti training by kaupapa Māori who are grounded in the whakapapa and context of he whakaputanga and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I recommend that the histories of Aotearoa are taught to all of our tamariki in a safe manner that enables our tamariki to be active change makers. And my final message is that you have been misled. You've been misled to believe that this government has sovereignty in Aotearoa. You've been misled to believe that the mana of Te Tiriti lies in the pen of Parliament. The mana of Te Tiriti lies in the land. It lies in the hands of the next generation who are choosing the laws of our tupuna, who are practicing our mātauranga tuku iho, like our previous submitter mentioned, and who are living in balance with our taiao. Your laws are not fit for the next generation, but our tikanga is. So I welcome you. I welcome this government to get right with Papa Tuanuku and to get right with this next generation, because we're leading the way now. Tēnā rā tātou. I'm happy to take any questions.
Justice, thank you for your submission. We have questions, one from Rachel Brooklyn.
Yeah, sort of in two parts. One is just a confirmation that you understand that you're talking to a select committee made of people from different political parties. So it's just you use the word you a lot, and so that you know that we're not all government representatives, and many of us find this bill very beyond troublesome. I haven't seen a nod, thank you. And the second one, my second point is you talked about history in schools just before, and in Parliament and lots of other places. So you're a proponent of history being in schools. Do you think that could be enhanced at all, and are you worried that it will be taken away?
Absolutely. I think education is power. I think that anything to do with our local histories and he whakaputanga Te Tiriti o Waitangi must be firmly informed by the local people, by the tangata whenua of the place, and should be done in a way or delivered in a way that allows our tamariki to process the emotions that come up with it, and to think creatively about what our future will look like. Yeah, I think that our tamariki are owed that. And I don't necessarily feel that the Ministry of Education or the government is the entity to roll that out, but they should be supporting it to happen in every school for every tamariki across this country. Kia ora.
Rachel, thank you, Justice. Thank you for your time this afternoon before the committee. We appreciate you providing the written submission and also speaking to that orally. We thank you for your time.
Tēnā tātou.
We're going to now invite Sam Mikaere from Te Nehenehenui Trust. And Sam is joining us online. Sam, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. You've just disappeared. There you are, you're back then. Hey, we've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Ai, waka ki te a koutou, I ngai te hui topa I te ahi ahi nei, o Samuel Te Ori Mikaere te kuingua koe te tumu whakarai o te Nehenehenui. A kind hello to you all today. My name is Sam Mikaere. I'm the Group Chief Executive for Te Nehenehenui, which is the post-settlement governance entity for Ngati Mone o Poto me ono hapu maha. I'll take my time today just to highlight that Ngati Mone o Poto strongly opposed to this bill and seeks that the Justice Committee recommend to the House that the bill be withdrawn. We've thought about our submission and we wish to express our disappointment and frustration that only 3.5 years after our treaty settlement, after a year and a quarter after our signing of the document and transfer of the assets after waiting 160 years for this to occur, that we then find ourselves having it undermined by language, by culture, and by way of life in an unimaginable extent. I guess what we'll do is we'll start first by referring to a whakatauki we have, Amuri kia mau ki te kāwau māro, whanake ake, whanake ake. The whakatauki basically encapsulates instructions of our ancestor Mane Poto, who on his deathbed gave the instruction to Ngati Maniapoto, the whānau, to remain steadfast and to be a fighting force like the comrade. I just raise that as a little bit of poetry. However, I think the key part of this for us is that we wish to take umbrage with the submission, particularly as it's as we've stated in our own submission. Towards us that Ngati Maniapoto opposes the bill fundamentally because it doesn't recognise and uphold our tino rangatiratanga. For us, we are concerned that in the principle 2 of the bill purports not to affect the rights secured under the historical treaty settlement. However, in our view, the implications of the treaty settlements have not been thought through carefully. In particular, we submitted that when read together, Principle 1 and 2 effectively narrows our treaty obligations, rights and interests to whatever is reached in our treaty settlements. So this provides no guarantee to the ongoing protection of tino rangatiratanga or the right of self-government contained in Article 2 of the Māori version, on which many treaty settlements, and including our own Maniapoto Treaty Settlement, is premised. A critical part of the Maniapoto settlement is the recognition of our tino rangatiratanga and mana motuhake, which is protected by Te Tiriti and the Maniapoto deed of settlement, as well as Te Ohaki Tapu. It's also the bill effectively strips away any ongoing recognition of underlying rights to development and self-government. In effect, it assumes that the treaty and its principles do not already constrain the Crown's obligations under the treaty, independent of treaty settlements that was agreed to by Ngati Maniapoto and the Crown. Further to this, the bill is inconsistent with the spirit and the intent of the Maniapoto settlement, which has just been completed. The settlement contemplated a renewed and enduring partnership between the Crown and Ngati Maniapoto, and in accordance with the spirit of Te Ohaki Tapu and based on Te Tira Te Waitangi, the Treaty Waitangi and its principles. So, thirdly, our tino rangatiratanga and mana motuhake were distinctly fundamental to our treaty settlement. In fact, mana motuhake and mana whakahaere are referred to in several places in our treaty settlement in the acknowledgement section. The bill will perpetuate the breaches of the treaty settlement itself, which it was attempting to remedy. So in summary, Ngati Maniapoto does not support the perpetuation of the treaty breaches and is strongly opposed to this bill. And we're happy to take any questions on this in terms of our submission.
Kia ora. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. Members, we've got a bit of time remaining, so I'll hand over to you as to anyone has any questions. No, there's none. One there from Rachel Brooking there.
Sorry, I had a puppy leaving the room. Thank you for that. This is a question I asked another submitter earlier on, who's also involved in settlement legislation at the moment, in deeds of settlement. Can you tell the committee where you are in your process and how you're working with this government at the moment?
We've completed our in terms of where we are in terms of our PSG and what process we're going through. We've had 2 settlement accord huis, which are the ones that come after you sign your PSG with the Waiwaia Accords. This is taking into account the 2012 Waiwaia Accord, which is the Ngati Maniapoto Abo settlement, as well as our own current one that was completed in 2022. Where we are with them is we're working closely with the Crown and in good faith, and that was based on the 12 relationship agreements and the joint management agreements we have in place with our local municipalities. We have, through our settlement and through the agreements in our settlement, managed to foster really positive relationships with the Crown that have helped us move towards creating better housing options, better health and safety, better hauora kaupapa, and a focus on mātauranga. So we find this bill is concerning because it has the ability to impact us in a significant way. It doesn't uphold or respect Maniapoto's mana motuhake and tino rangatiratanga, which in our settlement was an imperative. This settlement was to create mana motuhake, and it's our view that through the update of this bill's, the treaty settlement bill, that will be undermined significantly, which is one of the main reasons we do not support this bill.
And supplementary to that, so you've spoken then of your relationship with government and the good faith. So how does this bill fit with that good faith relationship with the government when it's this government that's been progressing the bill?
I think it's vexingly incongruous, and it creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance or whiplash, for one, as we have conversations on one hand, and then we are faced with the reality of what it could mean to expand this bill to be allowed to go into full effect. So for us, it is challenging because the bill narrows the treaty obligations to treaty settlements, and it somewhat has an impact on the way that we would go about it. Like in Clause 6, the bill provides a form of protection for rights that are agreed to in treaty settlements. We're concerned that this will be undermined. And these treaty settlement pieces have created opportunity for us to work cohesively with the Crown. So for us, it seems like, as I said, vexingly incongruous to our needs.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question from Helen White.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered if you could give us a really practical example. You talked about things like housing. I don't mind where it's from, but of how things are working presently in an area beyond the settlements.
We have set ourselves up with our settlement to move towards on behalf of the 56,000 members of our uri. We have about 7,000 living within the rohe and the rest living outside. So one thing we've done is we've used some of our putia to set up opportunities for proactive healthcare or preventative healthcare for our kaumātua. It's our view that they're a taonga for us and that we need to make sure that they get the best access we can provide. So that's an example of where we have taken it on our back post-settlement as part of our own mana motuhake, not to be dependent on the Crown. We are also working with the Crown, though, on things around our accords where they have agreements to sit with us and take views on our strategy, whether it's our environmental components or whether it's to do with our 5 or 10 or 15-year outlook on how we want to approach this. As we're intergenerational, we somewhat look beyond the Crown as we have a reliance on ourselves, and that's where the mana motuhake comes in. So I appreciate the question, but I can't say we have because governments can change. We like to take a more broad approach to allow ourselves to work with whoever's sitting in the seat, acknowledging that we are going to be here for generations.
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions, I've got a follow-up.
Yeah, one more, Helen.
I just wondered, you would have been around this for a while, and we've heard a lot in the submissions that I've been part of about the impact on children who have grown up with a lot of pride in their identity and their culture. Do you think, are you seeing an impact on that of this process? Is it hurting or helping those children or the young people in terms of the way they feel treated?
Well, look, it's a great question you're asking me as a CEO or as an individual. I guess
both.
When I take a look at it across the broad spectrum, I think the distortion a bill like this creates is unsettling to our young rangatahi who are learning about the treaty principles and now coming to an understanding that should the government determine something, they can make a fundamental shift to a codified concept that has sat since 1840 without consideration of us. As an individual, I do worry about it for my own children who are Māori growing up in our communities. And I hope, they ask me questions and I do give them answers about the fact that we need a pragmatic approach. But I do not like the notion that they could have something that they are proud of being marginalized.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Helen. Thank you, Sam, for your time this afternoon and for presenting on behalf of the Trust. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We're going to move now to a submission slightly earlier, but we'll go to John O'Neill, who's able to be with us slightly earlier than expected. So thank you, John, for being with the committee. We've got you for 5 minutes for your submission, so I'll hand over to you to begin.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Chair. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. It's a personal rather than a professional submission, and I'm very mindful of the fact that my extended family now includes children and young people who are Māori. So I thought that the last question put to the submitter was a really interesting and important one. So not to completely go through my written submission, but I do want to make the points that liberal theory and definitions of democracy are perfectly compatible with the principle of treating different groups differently in the best interests of everyone, and that seems to have been completely overlooked in the way that the bill is being developed and presented. Secondly, that contemporary understandings of fairness and justice include cultural recognition, political representation, ways of knowing, etc. And again, I think some of the discourse around the way that the bill and the principles have been talked about completely ignore that, as do other parts of the current government agenda. As Tauiwi, I find it objectionable that the treaty partner has not been involved from the outset in this process. It seems to me that it's also inconsistent with the bill's aspiration to maintain a free and democratic society. Those two are completely opposed in my view. As a number of commentators have already observed, the proposed principles bear no relation to the Te Reo Māori text, intention or spirit of Te Tiriti. The process to date has caused considerable harm both to Māori but also to non-Māori like myself, who are absolutely committed to being good Te Tiriti partners and feel that the developments of the last 30 years, slow and measured as they have been put under considerable stress through the process to date. But really the point I wanted to leave the committee with is that given the process to date and the criticisms of it, I think the members of the committee have a real opportunity to exercise their individual and collective consciences in the way that they report back to Parliament. I think the reporting back could offer a constructive contribution to the future ways that we talk about and engage in a national conversation about the future of Te Tiriti in our world, one that's based on evidence and reason rather than the unfortunate process, let's put it that way, that's been undertaken to date. So I'm happy to take comments or answer questions on that basis. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thank you for your submission and for being with us for presenting. We'll go to a question from Helen White first.
Hello. I've got a question that is about, I've been mulling over all day. You talk about the Liberal view being compatible with this. I was thinking about inheritance. So many people in this country are better off because they inherit large amounts of money. And this is a different form of inheritance. Is inheritance compatible with a Liberal ideology?
I think fair inheritances are certainly compatible with a Liberal ideology, which is committed to people being able to realise their best lives. I think if we're talking about cultural inheritance, then I would have thought that's fundamentally important, particularly if we're going to treat inheritance fairly and inclusively. Where I think inheritance runs into difficulties is where it's exclusive and it gives people privileges that they only gain through the actions of people who've gone before them.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Look, if there's no further questions, I'll just say thank you, John, for being with us this afternoon. We do appreciate every submitter that comes and presents to us in person, including yourself. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, and good luck with your work. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, so I think we have Deborah and Felix with us. So we'll go now to submission from Deborah Harding and Felix Ruka, who are Māori Ward Councilors in Whangārei. So we'll invite Deborah and Felix.
Just bring them in now.
So Deborah and Felix, if you can hear us, you have to accept, you have to click yes when you are invited to be a panelist so that we can let you into the room.
Alternatively, you go to Ngā or Tokomaru Aku.
They're here.
Online Maria night.
Well, let's see if Deborah and Felix can't accept the request, then we can probably swap their slot with Ngā Hapu or Tokomaru Aku, and we should have Maria Knight with us.
Raise their hand.
So I think whoever gets in first will just take that as the submission, and then we'll have the other party come in behind.
Okay, Deb Harding's coming in.
Okay, we've got Deb and Felix. Deb, thanks for joining us. We have you before us for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Excellent. Kia ora mai tātou katoa. Just a brief change to my submission. I think I had responded that Felix Cheng would be accompanying me, but he won't be present this afternoon. Mihi atu. I'd like to acknowledge all of those submissions prior to mine that have opposed this bill. And I take my submission of the 6th of January 2025 as read, please. The main threads of that submission was, I guess, in my role as an elected member in the Māori wards, and also externally as a hapu member of ngā hapu o Whangārei. So Whangārei District Council have been engaging and fostering relationships with ngā hapu o Whangārei in its many forms over decades in its efforts to acknowledge and implement the principles of Te Tiriti. Specifically, Te Kawerau is a strategic partnership group that incorporates equal numbers of hapu with elected members, that has a terms of reference and a vision. Ka tūtuki te kāwanatanga ārohe, ka puawai hoki te kotahitanga me ona tini kaupapa, which relates to local government that works through effective partnership and shared decisions to provide practical solutions. So aroha mai, just a little bit of background music there. We're looking after our mokopuna while their parents are at matatini. Anyway, I was at the translation of our vision, effective partnerships and shared decisions to provide practical solutions. And this should have been quite easy, a robust and gentle journey, but ka hore, because the Crown's overreaching into local government decisions undermines the foundation of the hard-earned established relationships between Whangārei District Council and ngā hapu o Whangārei. And these have taken years of trust and respect to build from. So this bill is one example. Making a poll for Māori wards is another one. Engari, in general, here we go. In general, this reflects the risk of damaging Māori-Crown relations, because the proposed bill is seen as an intent. Just bear with me for a second.
You're all good.
Sorry about that. That's the reality in this household. In general, this reflects the risk of damaging Māori-Crown relations, because the proposed bill is seen as an attempt to limit the rights and obligations created by the treaty. Another thread, the financial implications for this council, and likely all councils in Aotearoa. The new and untested treaty principles of this bill introduces legal uncertainty. It would require amendments to all the plans, policies, procedures, producing a layer of exorbitant legal and compliant costs that would be shifted onto the local community ratepayers. And they already don't like us on their current increase in rates, so I can imagine that we will absolutely not be popular on this one either. But if I could just now move to my own personal reflection, and the kupu I was thinking of in mind when I was putting this together was about thriving, right? Prosperous, growing, flourishing, and what might bring about Māoridom thriving. So we have this Māori economy through entrepreneurship is thriving. Māori finally having equitable health outcomes prioritised through a standalone entity, thriving. Māori wards introduced, thriving. Just a few examples. And then someone stops and looks at all this thriving and decides, oh no, this is not equal, and introduces a bill that will set the Indigenous people of this country back 2 decades or so. And I speak for our mokopuna, and here they come again. You know, we don't want to send them off to higher levels of learning. We don't want to send them off to higher levels of learning so that they are going to fight for the grievances of the past. You know, that's our generation. You know, that's our walk. We've already done a lot of that. We want to nurture them to be progressive and decisive and thriving in whichever field they choose. The Treaty Principles Bill policy is unfair, it's discriminatory and inconsistent with the principles of the treaty, and contrary to the Article 2, which guarantees tino rangatiratanga that will impact on the learning and living of our tamariki and our mokopuna. So thank you for allowing me to have that chaotic oral submission, part of who we are and how we cope with things in our daily lives. But tēnā rākau te katoa.
Kia ora, thanks, Deb. Look, in terms of chaotic submissions, that wouldn't even make the top 10, so you're all perfectly fine. Let's go to some questions. We've got a question from Helen White.
Hello, it was lovely seeing your baby there, gorgeous. What I want to ask about is that you talked about thriving and what you are seeing in the last, you talked about a sort of period of time where you'd seen the treaty taken seriously, maybe some settlements, and you'd seen a focus in health that was quite different. And you said you'd seen thriving. What does that thriving look like to you? Maybe because you're looking through the eyes of your makapuna.
Absolutely. And was that in health in particular or out of all of those?
What you were seeing, because you're actually a person that's probably seen the movement.
Aye. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes from nurturing our tamariki and you wanting them to get that higher level of education, right? And you send them off to university and get them home. And then you see them want to be strong advocates and share all this great experience and new knowledge and bring it back home, bring it into your rohe. And you see a significant impact that they are making. And for me, that's a point of thriving.
Yeah.
How you can take an individual, you can go away and come back and make this massive input, encouragement and influence to communities, all communities. And to me, that is thriving, you know. I mean, if I looked at my own, you know, what would thriving look like to me? It would be karakia, personal wellness, you know, independent of financial wealth,
Yeah.
you know, those things. But as a country, as a people, what does thriving look like? And we, prior, I guess, to the coalition government's introduction, there was a lot of things thriving.
Mm.
There was so much thriving, but I think that there was just too much for them to handle, that it looked like, oh, this does not look like equitable outcomes. Whereas for us as Māori, it was absolutely the right path.
Mm.
And I feel that the introduction of this bill is a way in which they can cease all of that. And then as a people, we have to backpedal. And then when we come forward, it's always in response. It's not free in our mind to be able to do great things, you know. We're always having to respond to the Crown, respond to policies.
Defensively, yeah. Thank you
Hope
very
that
much.
answers your question, sorry.
It does. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Deb. Look, thank you. That's the time for us this afternoon. Just want to pass on my appreciation on behalf of the committee for you and your whānau being with us this afternoon. You've certainly livened things up a little bit towards the end of the day, so thank you, Deb.
Ngā mihi mahana, kia ora koutou.
We're going to move now to our submission from Ngā Hapu o Tokomaru Aku, and we should have with us Maria Knight. Kia ora, Maria. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The committee has you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I will hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koutou katoa. No Ngati Pro no rongo whakata no Ngati whātua ki ora kei ahau. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge all our whānau who have gone before us. To those who are change makers, had a vision, had drive, and we thank them for the wonderful mahi that has happened over the many, many years. Therefore, it is important to know where we have come from to what we have achieved with the vision of our tipuna who have made it possible for us today. Secondly, to the panel this afternoon, ngā mihi. Thirdly, to all those who have spoken before during this process, I want to mihi to you all. There have been some amazing kōrero, inspirational and humbling speakers. We have heard a range of concerns, facts, figures, whakapapa, mātauranga. So we support and acknowledge those who are in opposition of this bill. Which brings me to the following whakatauaki, that it highlights the opposition of this bill. Kia kotahi te waiho I te waka, kia u ki uta. Only by rowing the canoe in unison will we reach our destination. This whakatauaki is an appropriate representation of where we are at the moment. Our waka is in the water, our team is rowing in unison, and the other part of the crew is still yet to participate. We as Māori are rowing, yet this bill is changing the direction of where we have paddled, where we are yet to paddle, and the strength that we will continue to row in unison. Kia kotahi te waiho I te waka, kia u, kia uta. I take that you have read this submission and I will speak to the main points in which were raised. Te Tiriti is not just a historical document, it is a living covenant, a sacred agreement that represents our tino rangatiratanga and the partnership between Māori and the Crown. This statement highlights the enduring and sacred nature of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, positioning it not merely in our history, but as a fundamental and ongoing agreement that continues to shape the relationship between Māori and the Crown. Te Tiriti is a living covenant. It emphasises that it is not just a historical document, but an agreement that remains relevant and binding today. A covenant carries a deeper meaning than a simple contract. It implies a sacred, enduring relationship built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. Kia kotahi te waiho I te waka, kia u, kia uta. A living treaty means that it's built on principles, and I refer to the 3 Ps, partnership, participation, and protection, that must continue to be honoured. It requires that both parties on this waka, Māori and the Crown, actively engage in upholding its intent, ensuring that it's not merely acknowledged in words, but applied in practice. Te Tiriti is more than a legal or political document. It is a sacred agreement that embodies the spiritual, cultural, and historical bond between Māori and the Crown, grounded in tikanga, whakapapa, and wairua. Calling Te Tiriti sacred affirms that any attempt to diminish, redefine, or ignore its significance is a violation of this fundamental relationship, as it represents not just rights, but also responsibilities to uphold the mana of our people, act as kaitiaki of our taonga tuku iho, and ensure the well-being of future generations. Te Tiriti explicitly guarantees Māori tino rangatiratanga, our absolute authority and self-determination over our lands, our sea, our resources, and our people. This was affirmed in Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which recognised the unbroken sovereignty of hapu and iwi. However, historical breaches by the Crown, including land confiscations, legislative suppression, and systemic injustices, have continually to undermine this guarantee. The 3 Ps that I mentioned requires meaningful consultation, shared decision-making, and the recognition of Māori voices at every level of governance. Kia kotahi te waiho I te waka, kia u kia ota. And hence why we are here today. However, this partnership has been repeatedly undermined by the Crown's actions that prioritise its own interests over Māori rights. Te treaty principles developed by the Waitangi Tribunal and the courts emphasise that Crown must actively protect Māori interests, acknowledge Māori perspectives, and engage in fair, transparent, and good faith negotiations whenever decisions impact our Māori communities. True partnership means recognising Māori as co-governors of Aotearoa, not as passive recipients of state policies. So who is rowing this whaka? To reinterpret Te Tiriti o Waitangi through this bill is an act of undermining its mana, its authority, sacredness, and standing at the foundational document of Aotearoa. This is not merely a political issue, it is a direct challenge to the integrity of Te Tiriti as a living covenant. When the Crown unilaterally attempts to reshape its meaning through legislation, it is an assertion of dominance rather than partnership. This kind of action contradicts the principles of ngā kaupono, which is essential for maintaining a relationship of trust between Māori and the government. I'll refer to Moana Jackson with his article on decolonisation and the stories in the land, which refers to colonisation as with the Crown. It stems from how we as Indigenous peoples were mistreated back then and which still occurs today. Jackson emphasises the wrong is with the Treaty of Waitangi and the Constitution being dishonoured by the Crown. To accomplish and correct the wrongs is through tikanga Māori, tino rangatiratanga, mana motuhake, and to recapture our mana for independence so hapu and iwi can gain autonomy. The assumption of equal treatment in Principle 1 suggests fair governance for all, but ignores the systemic inequalities Māori face due to colonisation, which is evident in health, education, housing, justice, and resource, just like the marine and coastal area. The government's claim to act in the best interests of all citizens is contradicted by the ongoing breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, continue to undermine Māori tino rangatiratanga as seen in the repeated disregard for Māori authority over land, resources and taonga. This is seen by centralised government decisions, such as the Fast Track Bill, being advanced while Māori and non-Māori voiced opposition through Toitu Te Tiriti Hikoi, demonstrating a failure to work in genuine partnership with iwi and hapu. A quote from Moana Jackson, iwi and hapu had our own systems of government, of the people, by the people, for the people. Principle 1 dismisses Māori self-governance by assuming that only the government can act in the best interests of its people, when in reality hapu and iwi have long-standing governance systems based on tikanga that predate colonial rule. But centralised government policies have historically undermined Māori self-determination, disrupting ability to protect whenua, resources and taonga for future generations. Principle 2 diminishes the broad rights guaranteed under Te Tiriti o Waitangi by restricting them to what is negotiated in treaty settlements, undermining the promise of hapu tino rangatiratanga. Māori rights are treated as negotiable rather than inherent and continuous, allowing the government to define and limit them instead of recognising Māori as equal partners. Treaty settlements often negotiated under unequal power dynamics. This approach allows the Crown to control the narrative, to continue to dictate what is considered a fair resolution and to claim it has fulfilled its obligations, while we as Māori continue to face systemic inequalities. Principle 3, the difference between equality and equity. This principle assumes that treating everyone the same will lead to fair outcomes, but it ignores the reality that Māori have been disproportionately disadvantaged by colonisation. Equality means giving everyone the same treatment, but if people start from unequal positions, treating them the same will not produce fairness. Equity means recognising historical and systemic disadvantages and ensuring fair opportunities, which is essential for true justice. This principle fails to address these systemic disparities, assuming that Māori will be fine if they are treated the same as everyone else. The danger of a one-size-fits-all approach. When the government promotes equal treatment without addressing systemic inequities, it maintains the status quo for Māori disadvantage. If a system is already unfair, treating everyone the same only benefits those who are already in positions of power. Ignoring these realities reinforces colonial structures instead of dismantling them. In conclusion, this bill is an attack on the very foundations of Te Tiriti partnership. We continue to do the 3 Ps. Then why isn't the Crown adhering to this? To allow such legislation to pass without challenge would be to accept a future in which Māori rights and responsibilities as kaitiaki are ignored. The bill disregards the spiritual and cultural weight of the treaty. It reduces our inherent rangatiratanga to a mere legal framework that aligns with the Crown's priorities. Such actions perpetrate the colonial narrative that the Crown holds ultimate authority over Māori and our whenua, our taio, and our moana. For hapu and whānau, this is deeply personal. Our tipena, and like many other tipena, signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi with the expectation of a true partnership, one where our autonomy would be respected, not diminished by legislative processes that prioritise the Crown's interpretation over ours. The bill dismisses the relational essence of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, something that we hold as paramount, and replaces it with a transactional framework. Therefore, I will finish with Moana Jackson, who said, "If there is anything that has marked the survival of our people and the flourishing of our people, it's that we have been brave." Kia kotahi te waiho i te waka, kia u, kia ota. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Maria. We're a bit over time, so we'll have to draw that to a conclusion. So just on behalf of the committee, thank you for your presentation and your time this afternoon. We are now going to our submission from the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine. And I think joining us, we have Dr. Kim Yates and Dr. Enia Tomash. Yes, come on, Brian. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon. You're our second last submission for this afternoon, so hopefully we can push on through, and just appreciate you being with us at the end of the day. So thank you. I'll hand over to you.
Sure.
Kia ora mai tātou, te mitu o tahi ki te iwi mana whenua, te ati awa taranaki whānui, ka tukuna hoki ngā mihi ki te whare paremata e tū nei, ki te komiti kai whakahaere e noho nei, tēnā korua. Ka mihi hoki ki a rātou ngā kai kōrero, kua tukuna whakaaro mo tēnei tino kaupapa, te principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. Engari, ko te tino mihi ki ngā whaiora Māori ara ngā whaiora mō ngā iwi katoa o te motu nei. Kei konei māua ki te porotēhe i tēnei bill, hei hāpai a tātou katoa ki te whai oranga i roto i a tātou koiora mō ake tonu atu. Ko wai enei e noho ki mua i a koutou, he uri māua mai te hiku o te ika, ko tinana te waka, ko tūmoana te tangata, ko kāriri kura te moana, ko tangone te wai. Ko whangataua te rātou, ko taumata māhoi, ko kokohuia ngā maunga, ko te rarawa te marae, ko te rarawa te iwi hoki. He rapa kakua ohorere māua, mai ngā tari ohorere o Tāmaki Makaurau. Ko Dr. Enia Tomash ahau, mai te iwi Māori tarara Pākehā. Kei konei he taituara mo tuku hua, mahi konei te tino kai kōrero māua. Kia ora, my name is Dr. Enia Tomash. I'm an emergency physician in Tāmaki Makaurau and a fellow of the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine. I'm here to support our medical college submission opposing the Treaty Principles Bill, and here to support my colleague and speaker, Dr. Kim Yates. Hei koe hoa.
Namihinui ki a koe mō tō mihi o te ahiahi nei. Tēnā koutou katoa no te rarawa no ingarani o ku tupuna no te tai tōkurawa hau ko Kim Yates tōku ingoa. My name is Dr. Kim Yates. I'm a fellow of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine and have been working as a specialist emergency medicine doctor for 27 years. I currently work in 2 emergency departments in Tamaki, Makawerau. I'm presenting this oral submission on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill on behalf of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine and in my role as co-chair of Te Ropu Manaki Mana, an advisory group within our college that supports excellence and equity in emergency care for Māori. The Australasian College for Emergency Medicine is a not-for-profit organisation that is responsible for training emergency physicians in Aotearoa, New Zealand and in Australia, and for maintaining professional standards in our emergency departments. The Australasian College for Emergency Medicine is opposed to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. As outlined in our written submission, our college is concerned that if the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill is implemented with its focus on equality rather than equity, it will increase health disparities and will remove the specific responsibilities the government has to address health inequities and monitor progress towards this goal. We believe this bill undermines the efforts of emergency care teams striving for equity and has created unnecessary distraction from achieving health equity goals in Aotearoa, New Zealand's emergency departments and across the health sector. As our colleagues in the Council of Medical Colleges and the Royal Australasian College of Physicians said in their written and oral submissions, the focus should be on equity rather than equality. The Australasian College for Emergency Medicine agrees with the Waitangi Tribunal findings that the process for developing this bill has already breached Te Treaty principles of partnership and reciprocity, active protection, good government and equity, as well as the Article 2 guarantee of tino rangatiratanga. Striving for excellence and equity in emergency care is important to our college and our specialist members. 5 years ago, our membership voted to add an object to our constitution that included commitment to the principles of Te Treaty o Waitangi, the reconciliation process in Australia and the intent of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Health inequities for Māori have been well documented over the years and have been the subject of the Waitangi Tribunal Health Services and Outcomes Inquiry Y2575. This report showed that attendance rates to our emergency departments are higher for Māori than for non-Māori. Ministry of Health and other data also tells us that Māori are more likely to die from sepsis or severe infection, from rheumatic heart disease or ischemic heart disease. Māori youth are more likely to die after major trauma. The Examining Emergency Department Inequity Study mentioned in our written submission showed that the death rate for Māori within 10 days of discharge from the emergency department is nearly twice that of non-Māori. From an outcome perspective, the system is working much better for non-Māori than for Māori. This bill will not reduce these disparities nor support action to improve outcomes. As noted in recent news articles, our emergency departments are under intense pressure and it is a challenging place to work, particularly when staffing does not match the patient workload. Seeing and discharging patients faster and avoiding admissions might seem like an obvious solution, but we need to make sure the outcomes are good for everyone. We need to ensure we have communicated well and have assessed the problem correctly and have the right diagnosis and treatment plan, and that plans and safety nets are negotiated and understood, and that we are doing the right thing for each patient. Building relationships and trust is important, and as Professor Paparangi Reid reminds us, cultural safety is clinical safety. This is particularly important for Māori, who we know present to the emergency department at a higher rate, and despite being seen more quickly and staying a shorter time, have a higher death rate on discharge. As doctors working in our public hospital emergency departments, we want equally excellent health outcomes for everyone in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But for Māori, this has not been happening. We recognise that rather than give everyone the same equal treatment, some patients need different solutions to have the same excellent, equitable outcomes. To address the inequities in the emergency department setting, we have developed a network of Manaki Mana Kaikōkiri champions in our emergency departments around the motu. These are emergency care workers who are passionate about achieving equity for Māori, who strive to identify and eliminate inequities and implement changes in our emergency departments. Our college and Te Ropu Manaki Mana have also produced specific checklists. The first, Te Treaty o Waitangi me Te Rautaki Manaki Mana, guides how we can apply the articles and principles of Te Treaty and meet our Te Treaty obligations in the emergency department setting. The second, He Aratiatia ki Te Taumata o Paoa, sets out steps towards Paoa, or healthy futures, with the forepower of upholding Te Treaty, providing equitable care, providing culturally safe care, and being anti-racist in action and policy. Using pain relief as an analogy for the differences between equity and quality, if I had 3 patients with broken arms, a 2-year-old, a 22-year-old, and an 82-year-old, if I was to give equal doses to all 3 patients, say 5 milligrams of intravenous morphine, that might be appropriate for the 22-year-old, but it would be an overdose for the 2-year-old and might stop their breathing and might put the 82-year-old into a coma. To get equally excellent health outcomes, we have to consider the situation and background and tailor our approach for each patient or group of patients. As another example of where equity is better than equality, if 2 teenagers present to the emergency department with fever and a sore throat, it might be tempting to say they have a viral illness or the flu. However, if one is Māori and the other is New Zealand European, then the Māori teenager has a much higher risk of getting rheumatic fever and subsequent rheumatic heart disease. So the Heart Foundation sore throat algorithm says we should routinely prescribe antibiotics for the Māori teenager, but could just do a throat swab for the New Zealand European teenager to avoid unnecessary antibiotics. This bill is contrary to the way health professionals need to care for their patients. So in summary, the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine opposes the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill and urges the government to abandon this bill. We urge the government to implement the recommendations of the Waitangi Tribunal as outlined in Ngā Matapono and take active steps to correct the flawed interpretation of Te Treaty that this bill presents. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you both for your submission this afternoon. I don't think there are any questions floating around from members, so I'll just acknowledge your submission on behalf of the committee. Thank you for being with us this late in the day and for being with us for a wee while now to hear some of the other submissions. We appreciate you being here in person and providing that context. Thank you. I'm just going to move now to the final submission of today's session, and I'll invite Janice Panoho up to the table. So Janice, if you'd like to join us, and then join us online as well as Mike Tana by Zoom. So Janice and Mike, I'll hand over to you to tag team or to whoever needs to lead off, but the 10 minutes is over to you.
I'm going to lead off and then hand it over to Mike. I called Janice Pānoho tōku ingoa, he uri a hau no Ngāpuhi Ngāti Whātua whānau whānui. Ko Aotearoa Kawerau Māori o Te Pukinga Here Tikinga Mahi, PSA. I work for the PSA, I'm the Kawerau Māori, and I will be speaking on behalf of Te Ropu Haututanga, which is the PSA Māori leadership team. We walk in the footsteps of our tūpuna, guided by their wisdom and resilience. As tangata whenua, we have never ceded our rangatiratanga to the Crown. The articles of Te Treaty safeguard our rights, and yet today those rights are under attack. This past year has been one of the most challenging for Māori in decades. We have seen deliberate actions by this government to divide our nation, diminish our progress, and erode our cultural identity. Racist rhetoric has resurfaced. Te reo Māori is being undermined, and a proposal to amend the treaty principles threatens our very foundation of Aotearoa, New Zealand. We submit this kōrero in opposition of the Treaty Principles Bill and the wider assault on Māori rights, identity, and constitutional protections. The disestablishment of Māori specialist roles, the government the government's removal of Māori specialist roles across the state and community sectors is an attack on the mechanisms that uphold Te Tiriti o Waitangi. These roles are essential. They ensure policies and services reflect a Māori worldview and protect Māori rights. With them, Māori voices are silenced, our communities suffer. The most recent Health New Zealand announcements to disestablish over 1,000 data, digital and other positions, potentially jeopardising the security and confidentiality of citizens' private medical information. This should be a concern to everyone. The proposed slashing of 47% of the workforce at the Data Digital Directorate exposes how poor the processes have been. Health New Zealand failed to provide workers with adequate reasons for the cuts, to properly listen to them in a rush to deliver the savings for the government, the government demanded. The attack on Te Reo Māori and Māori identity. Language is an identity. The government's move to remove Te Reo Māori from public services and official spaces is a deliberate attempt to erase our culture. Te Reo Māori is a taonga. Its suppression is a violation of our rights and history under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This bill seeks to strip Te Tiriti o Waitangi of its power, reducing it to a mere symbol. Māori and the PSA members have mobilised, marching in the Toi Tu Tiriti Hikoi, amplifying their voices to reject this attempt to weaken our rights. This bill is a step towards corporate exploitation of public resources, disregarding our partnership with the Crown. We acknowledge the Waitangi Tribunal's ruling that the disestablishment of Te Aka Whai Order breaches Te Tiriti. The Crown's rush process to repeal sections of Pai Order Act disregarded its obligation to Māori, removing critical protection for Māori health equity. We call for meaningful negotiations with iwi Māori to restore these rights. Exposing the true agenda, corporate interests over people. The push to amend the treaty principles is not about equality, it is about corporate greed. Te Tiriti protects all New Zealanders from unchecked privatisation and the erosion of public assets. Weakening the treaty is a direct attack on public ownership and Māori self-determination. Kotahitanga, united in resistance. Our tūpuna fought for our language, culture and rights. We will not allow their legacy to be dismantled. We stand as Māori, as tangata treaty, as workers to protect what is rightfully ours. We call on the government to withdraw the Treaty Principles Bill and uphold the Treaty of Waitangi, reinstate Te Aka Whai Order and Te Whatu Order for equitable health care, restore Māori specialist roles in public and community sectors, preserve and promote Te Reo Māori as a national taonga, reject the corporate exploitation of public resources, embedded Te Tiriti principles in the regulatory processes and judicial oversight, establish a Māori-led advisory group to ensure equitable decision-making, prioritise kaitiakitanga and intergenerational wellbeing in all policies, recognise innovation, entrepreneurship within economic frameworks, commit to Māori health equity through a genuine engagement impact assessment. My conclusion is this is a deliberate attempt to take away what is rightfully ours as tangata whenua and the government enterprises to have a duty of care as a good employer. If we do not stand together now, who will do this for our children and our mokopuna? Kia maia, kia mau, te mana, kia manawa nui. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tag team, ko Mike Tāna taku ingoa. I work with Janice in the PSA. I also have a personal experience, as does Janice, that we are both Māori and Pākehā. I think we're probably the best example of what the future, or our mukapuna, the best example of the future of this country should be. I know we've got a very short amount of time, so I'm going to just quickly go through some ideas. This country, the whole world, is watching a form of legislation that is really legislative deletion in the guise of equality. I have listened to and heard the most amazing submissions that have come to this table, and I think I am honoured to hear them, and I think you are honoured to be part of this. The bit that isn't honouring is that we're here in the first place. This should not happen, and I'm not saying that from what I heard, what I'm saying it from what I heard from Annie Mikaere, Marilyn Waring, Jenny Shipley, Jim Bolger, Ganesh Nana, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, of all people, says that this should not be happening in the way that it should. But I just want to say to you, if you're going to look at things, please, please, please take the words of the people that have either put them down on paper or have given them to you orally. They are so important. It's sad that we have to do it in this process, come back again in a form of submission. Māori coming in a form of submission to this government when we were supposed to be equal partners. 180 years of talking about that treaty, and yet still at a 1.5% return on what was lost, we're still arguing around the context of the process. It's a shame that we have in front of the whole world, in front of our whole country, but our young people are learning what fairness is. And fairness, I hope, I put to you in this last minute that we have, fairness, I hope, comes with your obligation as a select committee to do nothing more than to look at the wealth of information that you have received about this process and about this bill, and to give a true recommendation to this government, a government that says, Minister Luxon, we do not support this bill. It will go no further. I'm going to quote you, Rachel. This is beyond troublesome. This is a real sadness that we're here, but we want you as a select committee to do the right thing. 47 seconds, oh my word. Please, 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 recognize, respect, and honor sovereign Māori and your commitment to it. Educate our people to have a proper conversation, not this one that we're having here. Put on file and have available to everybody all submissions for and all submissions against, because this is a milestone for this country. People will be going in the future, coming back to this because of the wealth of knowledge that has come out in this process. Your duty is to give recommendations based on all that you have heard, and I give to you and to your staff who have had to take on this huge task. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. Thank you.
Good, Mike. Thank you. Now that is the time for the submission this afternoon. So just on behalf of the committee, Mike and Janice, thank you both for being with us and for capping off the day. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks. That is the last submission for today. So I would like to thank everyone who's joined us today for the submissions for doing so. And if you'd like to join us again, we'll be online at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for tomorrow's session. So thank you all.